Jaya Tvam Devi Chamunde, Jaya Bhutapaharini, Jaya Sarva Gate Devi, Kala Ratri Namostute. Jayandi Mangala Kali, Bhadra Kali Kapalini, Durga Shiva Kshama Dhatri, Swaha Swadha Namostute. Om Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadhike Sharanye Triambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Pranatanam Prasidatvam Devi Vishvarti Harini Trailokyavasinam Idye Lokanam Varada Bhava Lokanam Varada Bhava Om Shanti 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 Shri Saradarpanam Astu. Jayama, Jayama, Jayama. So, a special evening ahead of us tonight because it is indeed Navaratri. It is the fourth night of Navaratri when we're celebrating Ma Durga in the form of Kushmanda Devi. So, each night is a celebration of a different aspect of Mother's femininity and motherhood. So, of course, on the first night, we think of her as a young lover pining for her beloved, roaming the mountainside, wearing white garments, riding atop a bull. She is Shailaputri, full of the feminine radiance of like a full moon, you know. So, she is the moon, the deity who rules over the moon. And then on the next day, Ma Shailaputri takes on the form of Brahmacharini, she who is fiercely devoted to sadhana, to discipline. And here we are exploring the energy known as Mangaltva. Jaima, Jaima. So Mangal means Mars. And Mangaltva means Martian energy, which, as you know, is a warlike, determined sort of energy. It's a penetrative energy almost. And so with this energy, one can do very good spiritual practice. So Brahmacharini Devi is the embodiment of tapasvi, of one who is committed to tapasya, ardor, spiritual practice. So Brahmacharini, because Shailaputri, again, she is the incarnation of Sati, the reincarnation of Uma. And so she, for her whole being, like craves her reunion with Shiva, who she was just married to in a previous incarnation. And so now she feels the love for Shiva, and so she's ready to actualize that love by doing something about it. So as Brahmacharini, she starts practicing austerities that even the demons are frightened of. And that's really saying something because, as you know, demons can do some pretty fierce austerities. And so she's doing so much tapasya, so much spiritual practice that even the demons are frightened and they all come to dissuade her. And that's a common trope actually in many of these stories. Whenever a deity does a lot of sadhana, does a lot of tapasya, usually he will be interrupted. And usually when humans do tapasya, it's the the devas that will interrupt them because the gods don't like people attaining their powers. The gods are very jealous. So Indra especially is very jealous of people doing tapasya because it might mean that they will become more powerful than him. So he will send like an apsara or something like that to douse the fire of the tapasya. Yeah, and Viranatha is right. Like in the stories of Buddha and Jesus, one thing you notice is that when they go off to do spiritual practice, they are met with many quote unquote temptations or things like that. So where there's like an antagonist. So in the Buddha's case, it's Mara and Mara's daughters who come to get the Buddha to stop doing meditation, to stop doing austerity. Similarly, the Christ, he's in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, and there he encounters the devil. So this idea of like an opponent, an opposition, in the Hindu sense of the word, it's usually the gods actually who oppose humans. And not always the gods, asuras also. So in this case, Parvati, or otherwise known as Shailaputri here, becomes Brahmacharini. So she's working day and night tirelessly to realize her oneness with Shiva. She's meditating, she's doing japa, she's standing on one leg, etc., etc. All sorts of spiritual practices. And so the demons come to dissuade her. And so they holler at her and jeer at her and try to intimidate her and scare her. And obviously, you can see this is maybe a symbol or a metaphor for the psychic forces that tend to come up as you intensify your sadhana. And so, as you do more spiritual practice, you encounter more of the darkness within. And it becomes harder and harder, as it were, to make progress the deeper you go or the more progress you make, in one sense. So what happens, yeah, distractions and all manner of things. And notice Brahmacharini Devi, who represents Mangaltwa, discipline and resolve, she remains unabashedly focused on her sadhana. She doesn't care. She doesn't bother about these demons. She just does her mantra, focuses on meditation, whatever it is that she's doing. And there's a story where the Kamandalu tips over. Kamandalu means the vessel that holds the water, which is often very central in imagery of tapasvis and people who are doing a lot of austerity. sadhus tend to carry these kamandalus. So the kamandalu tips over and a flood of water pours out to drown the demon horde. So here you can think that Shakti has come and subsumed into oneness all these disparate waves of antagonistic forces. So there's this unification, almost like a healing regeneration myth is being described here, like the Nile flooding or something like that. So here the water flows and all the demons are subsumed and overcome. And then, interestingly, according to some other narratives, Lord Shiva himself comes to disturb Parvati. So Lord Shiva comes as like a scruffy beggar or as a sadhu and starts insulting Parvati and saying like, "Who do you think you are? You're doing all this sadhana. What's the purpose of this, etc." So even Lord Shiva tries to dissuade Parvati from her sadhana. After all the demons had failed to do so, Lord Shiva comes and tries to do it. Remarkable. And then he's so impressed with her ardor that he reveals himself to be Shiva, and Parvati is like, "Oh my God!" And then they of course have it's a happily ever after at that point. So there's that mythical structure of the goddess who is willing to do intense austerities to win Lord Shiva's hand, because Lord Shiva, mythically speaking, is not a deity who is impressed by beauty or by power or by wealth or anything like that. He's mostly impressed by austerity, by sadhana, by spiritual practice. So Shiva has a deep reverence and appreciation for those who do spiritual practice with that level of ardor. So that's how Parvati, or in this case, Brahmacharini, wins his hand. Now, the marriage itself is what we celebrated yesterday. Chandraganta Devi, the one who is moon-like and is like a bell ringing, whose resonance destroys all asuric forces. So here there's that beautiful myth of Lord Shiva coming to Parvati's wedding. So all the while, they're expecting Lord Shiva, and Parvati's mother is so excited to meet her new son-in-law, and so they're standing on the balcony waiting for the wedding procession to reveal Lord Shiva. So one by one all the deities are coming into the courtyard. And remember, Parvati is the daughter of Himalaya, the daughter of Himavat, sorry, the ruler of the mountain. So this is a palatial sort of wedding where the king and the queen have opened their palace up to everyone, to the gods and their retinues and whatnot, to come and participate in this wedding. So one by one, the gods are coming. First, maybe Surya comes, radiant like the sun, and with him are all the radiant beings like the horses, Ushnik and whatnot. And the mother of Parvati asks, "Is this your son? Is this my son-in-law? Is this your future husband? How beautiful, how radiant he is, how powerful." And Narada, who is there at the time, is like, "No, no, no, Ma, that's not Shiva, that's Surya. No, no, no. Your son-in-law is even more radiant, even more powerful, even more handsome than this." So then comes Kubera, the Lord of Wealth, after Surya. And Kubera has all his resplendent jewelry and jewels and whatnot, and he's bedecked in the most bedazzling outfit, and his retinue are the most elegant and sophisticated looking folk. And Parvati's mother thinks, "This must be him. Is this my future son-in-law? Is this the bride-to-be's husband?" And Narada says, and she says, "How handsome, how powerful, how radiant is this man?" And then, of course, the Narada, eternal troublemaker, says, "No, no, no, Ma. This is not Shiva. This is Kubera. Shiva is even more radiant, more handsome, more powerful than this. Just you wait." Then comes I don't know, various gods, one after another. You know, you can imagine then Vishnu comes in on his eagle, surrounded by all of his retinue and whatnot. And of course, Parvati's mother is so excited. "Is this him? Surely this must be him. I haven't seen anybody walk into this palace more radiant and more powerful and more handsome than this Vishnu. Who else could ever match this person? This must be my daughter's future husband. This must be my future son-in-law. How lucky I am to be the mother of so powerful and so radiant and so handsome a figure." And Narada says, "No, no, mother. That's Vishnu. Yeah, by far. He's the most radiant, except Shiva is even more radiant, even more beautiful, even more handsome, and he's coming next. So you just wait, just wait." And then comes the most cacophonous racket of all. See, everyone else has like minstrels and musicians to herald their coming. Shiva has that too, except they're all goblins and demons and crooks. And so the most cacophonous, horrible sound you ever heard starts to resonate through the halls. And suddenly all these demons break into the palace, and they're hungry, and they start immediately eating all the wedding food, you know, that's reserved for the dinner. They don't even wait for the cake to be cut or anything. It's like, "Ugh," and they come in singing their loud, drunken songs. And Parvati's mother is taken aback. And she's like, "Should we call the guards?" And Narada is sitting very calmly and smiling and be like, "No, mother, wait, wait, wait. Your son-in-law is coming." And so one by one, horrible demons start entering into the palace, one worse than the other, bhutas, ganas, and all sorts of things. And finally comes this god-awful looking bull. Now, everyone else is riding in with majestic eagles and chariots of gold drawn by celestial horses, etc., etc. You can only imagine what Surya and Chandra's vehicles are. And what to say of Vishnu's vehicle? His Vahana is Garuda. Like, Garuda, how noble is the eagle? But then the bull, there's something about the bull that's like underwhelming after you see all those golden chariots and silver chariots and whatnot. So this ugly squat bull starts hobbling into the room, and seated atop the bull is this dusty ascetic with matted locks covered in bone ornaments and snakes, and whose hair is, I mean, like birds are nesting there, and like just covered in ass and shit. And he's horrific to look at, and so, according to one narrative, Narada says, "Ah, you see, Ma, this is your son in law. Is there anyone in this universe so handsome, so powerful, so radiant?" And the mother in law faints. She passes out then and there. So, according to a more Shakta narrative, Parvati is pissed at Shiva for not presenting himself better. She doesn't like that Shiva, the fierce iconoclast that he is, didn't take into consideration that he was coming to a wedding in a palace in civilized society. According to one Shakta narrative, Parvati is insulted, actually, that Shiva wouldn't take the time to present himself better. So she scolds him and scares him. She turns into Kali and scares him. It's very much like the Mahavidya narrative, where Shiva doesn't allow Sati to go to to go to Daksha's yagya. So she turns into the Mahavidyas to scare Shiva into giving his consent. It's like that. So a lot of the Shakta myths involve Parvati asking for permission for something only to realize that she doesn't need to ask, that she doesn't need permission, that she can do whatever she wants unapologetically. And if anybody, even God on the level of Shiva, were to stand in her way, she will easily brush them aside with the unimpeded flow of her will. So a lot of the Shakta mythical structures are like that. So in this Shakta telling, she turns into Kali and scares Shiva, and Shiva is then scared into taking a bath. In another version of the story, she herself gives Shiva a bath. I think both versions of the story are kind of reconcilable. You could say she scares him into thinking that he now needs to take a bath. So then she catches hold of his ear, you can imagine, and like drags him into the shower and gives him a nice bath. Now, meanwhile, in the sanctum sanctorum, what do you call it? In the throne room, Parvati's mother, the wife of Himavat, is trying to get the wedding to be called off. She's telling her husband, please, you have to call the wedding off. You don't understand. Our daughter is getting married to like a hemp smoking demon lord. Like he's not the person for her. Like she's so refined. She's a princess of the Himalayan kingdom. And now you're going to marry her off to this guy, this dropout. Please, you have to call out the wedding, etc., etc. So Himavat, of course, he can't do that. He's a king. He's given his word. Like everyone's already gathered for the festivities. So he's in a bit of a tough spot. Anyway, she gets up, and in a huff and a puff, she turns around and storms out of the throne room. And she's like walking out, at which point she bumps into somebody's chest. And she looks up and she sees a newly washed Shiva, whose hair is nicely oiled, whose ash has been washed off, and who's now stepping into the room with his full radiance. And at that point, Himavat's wife, Parvati's mother, looks up at him and thinks, how handsome, how radiant, how powerful. And then she passes out with just sheer delight. So that's one of the rare moments when Shiva is dressed, cleaned up and dressed up and made presentable. But notice it's the power of the Devi that does this. So Chandraganta is that. Having done all those austerities, she's come into her own, if you will. And she's married Shiva, and she's no domesticated wife either. She's no pushover. She's somebody who is willing to advocate for herself and assert her will and achieve her ends in the world, as you can see. So Chandraganta is often depicted as a warrior woman, sitting on a lion now, no longer a bull, because she now has her own Vahana, and she has weapons and whatnot, and she's a young bride now, about to get married. So yesterday we celebrated the goddess's marriage, and today we're celebrating her pregnancy. So having entered into marriage, now she's with child, and so Kushmanda Devi holds like a pot, either filled with milk, or sometimes filled with wine, or sometimes filled with blood. And so this represents, of course, menstruation and the creative power of menstruation, but it represents the pot. Obviously, the pot is the womb, and it represents the nourishment and fertility of the divine feminine, which is typically what goddess worshipping cultures tend to focus on: the fertility of nature and the abundance of fruits and plants and trees and whatnot. So this is an important aspect of the divine feminine. But here in the Chandi, we're also focusing on her destructive potential, on her warlike radiance. So it's all aspects of the divine mother. Mother as a young maiden, the Kanya Kumari, you could say, like the Virgin Mother, which Catholicism, of course, focuses on a lot too. And then there's the woman who is self-assertive and working very hard for her own goals. So I guess now you could say it's like kind of like the boss woman, somebody who is career driven, like that idea of Mangaltwa, a woman who has strong martial energy, a woman who is willing to pursue her own goals without feeling like she has to sacrifice them for the sake of the people that she's taking care of, etc., etc. So I think even the resolve to do spiritual practice itself can be a lot to ask of somebody who feels so beholden to their children and to their spouse and to their house and to their mouse. And it's hard to take the time to do the kind of sadhana that it would be required to do in order to attain some real spiritual power. And often when you start doing that sadhana, all sorts of obstacles will come up. So it takes great resolve, great energy, great discipline and inwardness to be able to pull that off. And that's what brahmacharini represents. A strong, assertive woman who is pursuing her own goals independently. There's a kind of fierce independence to brahmacharini. And then, of course, Chandraganta refers to the bride, the woman who is getting married. But here, she's not losing herself in her marriage. She's not even completing herself in her marriage. She's sharing her power and wholeness by her own will and her own voluntary desire with her husband. And so here you can see a very empowered image of the bride or the wife. And now you get the idea of the mother. And so here she's holding the child. And she hasn't yet given birth to the child. She's with a pot representing her womb full of nectar or full of wine or full of blood. But she's also holding weapons. So it's kind of beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, and you could see every spiritual tradition, like the Abramelin tradition, like there's so many spiritual traditions which are all about going into solitude and doing something for a period of time with a lot of rigor and discipline. And then as a result of that, you come into your own power, and then through that power, something is manifested or something is birthed into the world. So that's Kushmanda Devi, and today we're celebrating mother, as a pregnant woman. And tomorrow, we'll celebrate her as Skanda Mata, the one who is the mother of Kartika or Skanda, one of the children of Lord Shiva. Skanda and Ganesh, they're two children. So notice, the one thing I want to point out now before we get into the text itself is this. Navaratri itself explores many different shades of femininity, many different aspects of God as mother or God as goddess. And so you'll see in the Chandi a lot of different phases and aspects of the Divine Mother. And they're all given different names. So there are 700 verses in the Chandi or in the Devī Māhātmyam, as we discussed earlier this week on Monday. So much so that it's telling that there are 700 verses because sometimes the book is just referred to as the 700, right? The Śākta Sati. The Śākta Shati means Sapta 7, Shati 100. So Sapta Shati means the 700 verses. 700 verses of the goddess. Now it's really interesting if you do the work to derive the names that appear in the book of the Divine Mother, you'll get about 700. More or less, there are 700 names of the Divine Mother in a book of 700 verses divided over 13 chapters. That's very important because it makes the book something of a Sahasranam or a Namavali. Sahasranam means 1,000 names, but 1,000 is just kind of like hyperbolic. Like obviously in a 1,000 named hymn, there are at least 1,000 names or about 1,000 names. But the number Sahasra, 1,000, is just a Sanskrit like linguistic device to mean infinite. So the reason why there are 1,000 names for the goddess, like Lalita Sahasranama or Kali Sahasranama, is because there are infinite names of the goddess. And to prove that, here are 1,000. It's no joke, to come up with 1,000 different ways to call out to somebody or to think of somebody. So a big part of tantric practice is meditating on the 1,000 names of your chosen goddess. So there is even one for Sri Ramakrishna. It's called Sri Ramakrishna Sahasranam. Every deity that is worshipped who has a mantra will probably also have one of these texts. There's a Bagalamukhi one. And of course, when you study the Bagalamukhi one or the Chinnamasta one or the Matangi one, you'll see that there are many overlaps. They're very syncretic. A lot of the text will have names that you find in other texts too. There's a Vishnu Sahasranam, there's of course the Shiva Sahasranam. But one thing you'll notice is that the Vishnu and Shiva Sahasranams are a little simpler. The Sanskrit in those texts are more Vedic, they're more direct. Whereas the Sanskrit that you find in the Lalita Sahasranam, for instance, is way more poetic, more refined. There are longer words, bigger compounds, if you will. For instance, Krodha Karang Kushojvala. Oh my God, what a beautiful name for the goddess. She who is holding an elephant goad flashing with anger. But just hear the alliteration. Krodha Karang Kushojvala. Ujvala means to shine. Ankusha means elephant goad. So just combining those two words, Ankusha and Ujvala, Ankushojvala. Oh my God, you get the sense of softness with the sh sound. But that Ankusha, there's still an Ank sound. There's Ankushojvala. And Krodha means anger. So Krodha Kara Ankushojvala. And that's a big compound, you know. So in the Lalita Sahasranam, you get a flavor, and that's a flavor of refinement and sophistication and poetry and beauty and sensuality. There's so much sensuality and erotic imagery in the Lalita Sahasranam, which is of course absent in the Vishnu Sahasranam. But similarly, in the Kali Sahasranam, you also get really big names, but there the flavor is very different. For instance, in the Lalita Sahasranam, the opening name is Shri Mata. Obviously, she's the mother, and she is Shri, the auspicious Mata, the auspicious mother. Shri Mata. Shri Maharagni, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari, Chid Agnikunda Sambhuta, Devakarya Samudyata. So the first few names describes the goddess in her creation aspect, in her maintenance aspect, and in her destruction aspect. So as a creator, obviously she is the mother because the mother gives birth to the universe. That's one of the reasons why in our tradition we prefer to depict God as woman, as mother, because we attribute the act of creation or Genesis not to the father but to the mother in whose womb this appears. So mother is the creator, the Shishti Kara, the one who emits the universe, pours it forth into existence. Shri Mata. And isn't it wonderful? Isn't it grand? It's a wonderful thing that there is a universe at all. So Shri means auspicious. So she is the mother, and it's good that she created the universe. You guys, I could do a 2 hour bit on just this, on the goodness of the world. Because you can see how it's in direct contrast to traditions that tell you birth is suffering, life is suffering, death is suffering, rebirth is suffering. Hare, you look at everything and you see death and horror and suffering and you call it wisdom. I call it pessimism. I mean, it's like, it's an inability to see the meaning in what appears. And therefore we call it void or we call it an illusion, which is fine. That's a perfectly valid tradition. But here we're saying the mother who births the world is auspicious, for the world is auspicious. The world, as an effect, takes on the qualities of its cause. And if God is indeed the cause of the world, then the effect, like the cause, must also be beautiful and auspicious. So now we're not willing to say that the world is suffering, that samsara is bad. We prefer to say that samsara is nirvana, actually. It's only a matter of how we see it. And it's our failing that we don't see it for what it is, for it's God and God alone. And therefore, Shri Mata, the auspicious mother. But once she creates the world, this other question comes in. And again, we could actually legitimately do, and we have done, another 2 hour bit on just this. What does it mean for God to rule the world? So God created the world, that's one thing. And we could really discuss what creation looks like. Is it parinama? Is it vivarta? In other words, does God actually change as a result of the creation? Or is the creation a mere apparent arising in God? Does it have any reality? And if it does, is it more like an abhasa, an external reflection without admitting any change in the cause? There are so many sophisticated theological points we can make about creation, but we won't. Let's just put that aside for now. Now let's consider maintenance. Having created the world, God now rules over the world that she's created. But what does that look like? Does God create the world and then fuck off? Does she step to the side and allow the world to function according to laws that she set in motion but is no longer involved in? So this idea of like the world as a clock or a machine with gears, and God just acts as the primum mobile, the one who pushes the first domino. Sorry to mix metaphors, but the idea of God as a passive overlooker. And that makes sense if you have free will. Because if you have free will, then actually we are doing shit in the world. And God's like on the outside watching, like a person might watch a football game rooting for their team to win. So God's like looking in and God's like, Teresa, please choose me, girl. Please. I've come to you so many times in so many forms, and it's 8 o'clock, and you have two choices. You can either, do this and think of me, or you can do something else. And God's just like, God can't do anything. God's just waiting for Teresa to act. Will Teresa bring her camping gear to San Francisco, or will she find an Airbnb? And God's just like watching, like waiting to see what Teresa will do. But he's very invested in what Teresa is going to do at this point. But he won't intervene. Because if he does intervene, that would be to be a tyrant. Then God is no longer just, benevolent, and loving, because God is now saying, Teresa, go and buy the tent. Or Teresa, time to look into some Airbnbs. And early too, because then they'll be cheaper, etc. Like if God were to do that, he would be hijacking Teresa's free will. Look at me trying to justify not replying to that text for a while. Okay. But like the idea of a deity being transcendent is also important to maintain free will. So that in the immanent realm, we act, and therefore the deity is absolved of the bad shit that happens. Because if there is a Holocaust or something like that, it's not the deity who directly acts and does it. It's the deity allowing free will out of his or her compassion, their compassion, and then we abuse that free will in order to harm one another because of our misaligned ideas of the good, you know. So this idea of God as passive ruler is very important. So again, if you have free will, and if God interferes in any way, shape, or form, then she is hijacking your free will or influencing your free will. And therefore, that's a God that does not respect you, your sovereignty, your dignity, or your free will. So the idea of free will does three things. One, it maintains the idea of God as just, as good, and as benevolent because she respects your free will. Secondly, it allows God to remain transcendent, beyond the world that is subject to change, death, and decay. And thirdly, it allows God to go scot-free for all the horrors that occur in the world. So this is called the problem of evil, one of my favorite subjects ever. Theology, it's called. How do you justify God? Because in this world, horrible things happen to seemingly innocent people. This is one of the strongest arguments levied against theology by like the atheist thinkers as early as ancient Greece, and of course as early as like Vedic India. The Charvaka thinkers were already threatening the religious structures of the time by positing this: how could there be a God in such a world? And the answer that theologians often give is this: well, there's free will. If God were to interfere, then God would not be benevolent. And so God steps aside as the transcendent deity. She provides a space in which humans can do whatever they want. And often, because humans can do whatever they want, they act wrongly and harm one another. And God doesn't like it when they do that. She cries. She cries tears in heaven with Eric Clapton when you do a horrible shit, you know. And so then, when every now and then you seem to be hopelessly mired in sin, or whatever the term is in the tradition, Maya or whatever, God manifests. She comes as an avatar, like Jesus or something, in order to absolve us of our problems. But this is not directly interfering. It's just trying to help in the most spacious way possible. So this is the idea of ruling over the world as a transcendent witness to humans and their free will and whatnot. But there are other versions of this too. Like now it's not just God. Like in the Zoroastrian worldview, there's God, but God also has an opponent. So Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light, or God properly speaking, is confronted by his enemy, Ahriman. And Ahriman is ruling over the world, and God is beyond the world. And Ahriman is the God of the world. Now Ahriman, or the devil or whatnot, cannot also influence free will. Like the free will is an absolutely given thing. And God can't influence it, God won't influence it, and the devil can't influence it directly, but they can try to convince you, arguably. So now you get this idea of an arm wrestling sort of situation where Ahura Mazda is on one side, Ahriman is on the other, and there's an arm wrestling match, and it's a battle for your will, for your mind, etc. And you can see how the Gnostics really take after this, and they argue that there is a demiurge. And the demiurge is the god of this world. And they will go so far, some of them, not all, I mean, Gnostics are a very diverse tradition, but some of them will say that the Old Testament is speaking of a fallen god or a lower god called the demiurge. Because what kind of person would trap humans in a garden and then, like, you know, tell them that they can't have knowledge or power or something like that? So in this Gnostic version, Christ is actually the serpent. Christ appears as the serpent to help these people get out of the Garden of Eden, which is like this perpetual Sunday afternoon prison that they've been subjected to, in order that they may actually grow into their true stature as ye sons of God, as St. Paul said. But you know, here, this idea of the demiurge obviously is in dialogue with the Zoroastrian idea of like Ahriman. And the demiurge, the devil, Ahriman, whatever you want to call him, the craftsman, etc., etc., he is the god of this realm. And like that, there's a God of immanence, and it's opposed to the God of transcendence, who is the God of love and justice and goodness, which you find in the New Testament. So some Gnostic traditions reject the Old Testament as being the God of the demiurge, but here the demiurge God, but then here they accept the New Testament. And if you take the Bible as a whole, then how will you resolve the inconsistencies that you find between the characterizations in the Old versus the characterizations in the New Testament of God? So, etc. Now, the Śākta theology takes a very different view, a startlingly different view. The Śākta theology dismisses the duality between creator and creation. So now the creator is the creation. And then the idea of individual souls, the Śākta philosophy will say each individual soul, just like the rest of creation, is the creator. So God actually becomes Amanda Ma. and Gretchen Ma and Brandon G. Like God actually turns into the world in which Brandon, Amanda, and Gretchen have their being. So there's no concept now of free will. There's only the idea of mother's will, which is always free. So it's still free will, but it's God's free will expressing itself as the minutest action in this creation. So not even a leaf moves except by the will of God. This is Sri Ramakrishna's declaration. And the point that he's trying to make here is that God is not a passive observer who sets things in motion and waits to see the outcome. God is an active, involved being within the world who is also embodied as the world. So this is a radical theology. So now the problem of evil is with God. You see, so because God actually did everything, that then it becomes a very complex idea of like, okay, if God is this child, then why does God want for this child to like be killed in a bomb or something? Like, why would God want to, as a child, be like blown to bits on the battlefield? That's weird. Why would God want that? And then you get very beautiful theories of art and poetry and the idea of like things being meaningful without necessarily having to appease our concept of what's good and what's bad. So now you get a God that transcends morality. And this is the first point I want to make before you enter the Chandi. You're going to be tempted to think that this is a Zoroastrian dualistic battle between good and evil. But hopefully, in just a few moments, I'm going to try to confound that by showing you that God is as much to blame for what happens with the Asuras as what happens, as much to praise as what happens with the Devas. I'm going to point out that the Devas are not so good either. You know, this sounds like I'm an Asura making an argument from my homeboys. I am, and I will. But I'm going to argue that no, the Devas are no heroes either. Their hands are just as dirty as the Asuras. And actually, it's not a question of morality because the goddess traditions take you beyond the patriarchal idea of right and wrong. By the way, what do you think is right? Just whatever it is that your institutions have told you, right? Right and wrong might not be absolutely given categories. They're just what you've been told. And therefore, I want to introduce you to a very important kind of morality. It's popular amongst Christian theologians. It's called divine command theory. It's very important because we have to ask this question, where does morality come from? Like, what is the source of ethics? And you could say there's an is-ought fallacy. So what we ought to do, um, how do you justify that we ought to do it? You know, and Swami Vivekananda used to weigh in on this very powerfully. He would say, we ought to do what is metaphysically true. And so if there is Advaita, and that's the claim that Swamiji is making, there is Advaita, meaning there's non-duality, then I am Gretchen. And whatever I do unto Gretchen, I'm doing unto myself. So do unto others what only you would have done unto you. Swamiji is arguing is an Advaitic claim. It's an ought based on an is. He's not saying you ought to do it like in the sense of like, oh, if I wish Gretchen happy birthday, and by the way, when is this body's birthday, Gretchen? But if I were to wish Gretchen happy birthday, then I could think, oh, it's good that I do that, you know, because then maybe Gretchen will wish me happy birthday. And so birthdays are very funny because it's almost like we enter into this social contract with one another where it's like if I celebrate you, then you will have to celebrate me. So this is a strong motivation to celebrate you. Okay, so I better throw you a really great party on your birthday because then you're more likely to throw me a really great party on my birthday. Or I better obey the red light because if I don't do it, other people might not do it. And then I'll get into an accident. So it's in my interest actually to not run the red light because I wouldn't want to set that standard for others. This is usually how people misunderstand Kant's categorical imperative because Kant is saying only will that which you would have everyone will. In other words, do only what you think everyone else should do. And so often we read that in utilitarian terms. That's not what Kant meant, by the way. Kant is not arguing that the reason you should do something is because ultimately it'll be beneficial for you. That is not at all Kant's argument. But this is what people often misunderstand the categorical imperative to mean, that we should do something because if everyone were to do what we did, would that be good? And if it is, then yeah, then we should do it. So there's this idea then that morality is based on utility, utilitarianism, that what we should do is just that which brings the greatest amount of good. So I'll ask you this. If it was net good to put all the children in your country into factories, okay, take them out of schools right now and put them into factories and sweatshops and have them make Nike shoes, would you do it? Now, knowing that doing it would mean the economy would be so great that you would have welfare for everyone and there would be like cradle to grave support from the government, etc., etc. If I could show you that there was a net good to putting all the kids into the factories, would you do it? And if you were a true utilitarian, you would. You'd be like, yeah, although it's bad to put children in factories and force them to work, the net good, the overall positive that could come from it, more than justifies the means. So the ends are always justifying the means. So if the ends are good, whatever means you took to get there are also good. And so this idea of like if you're on a train track, and classic trolley analogy, and there are two tracks, and one track has one person and the other track has five people, and the train is heading towards the track with five people, it's like, would you pull the lever, diverting the train, killing one to save five? And it's obviously a very complex question. It's a thought experiment because there's so many complexities that you can introduce into the trolley problem, and also so many memes that you can generate from this thought experiment. I love the one where this father is trying to teach the trolley problem to his young boy, his child, and they're using actual train tracks. I mean, sorry, toy train tracks, and they're like, there's one guy here and five guys there. And then the father is telling the boy, what would you do? Would you kill one to save five, or kill five and not intervene? And the boy takes the train, and then he finds a way to kill them all, right? He like puts the train this way and he kills all six. So it started this like meme tradition called multi-track drifting, where it's like now these super nihilist anarchists on the internet are like, you know what? Why kill one to save five? Just kill all six, because life is meaningless anyway. So the trolley analogy has really gotten out of hand. And I actually, in college, I remember we would read a lot of stuff about the trolley, like modern philosophical papers and academic resources on it. And I encountered one. I forget entirely where this literature came from. Some university did some study, but from what I remember, they like hooked people up to the VR back when the Oculus Rift was just coming out and VR was so new. And they asked a group of people what they would do. And some of them, obviously, because they're deontologists, said, and these I think were philosophy, like Bachelor of Arts, like candidates or something. So some of them said, I wouldn't pull the lever. And of course, I'm a deontologist. I wouldn't pull the lever. And others said, I would pull the lever, right? Utilitarians. They're willing to kill one to save five. And this is interesting. Then they hooked them up to the VR and had them actually experience, not actually, but virtually experience this scenario. And a lot of the people, a startling number of people who said they would pull the lever in the VR simulation of that thought experiment didn't pull the lever. Isn't that interesting? When they actually saw the people and they heard the train and they were there in front of the lever, they didn't pull the lever, which is so weird because they said they would do something. Intellectually, they reasoned that it would be good to save five and kill one, even though that one was a bystander. They reasoned out that inaction is a kind of action. But when they were actually in that virtually in that situation, they couldn't pull the lever. Isn't that interesting? So sometimes our intellectual convictions in terms of ethics and morality don't actually pan out. It's not actually what we end up doing. That's why the Mahabharata is so profound, because you get the character of Duryodhana who knows what he's doing is wrong. And there's an episode actually where Shri Krishna goes to Duryodhana and says, gee, what you're doing is wrong. Don't do this. And Duryodhana says, I know what is right to do. I just don't feel like doing it. And I know what is wrong. And I just can't help myself from doing it. It is your will alone that impels me. So Duryodhana puts the blame back on God, back on Shri Krishna, actually. Isn't that interesting? And in a sense, he's right. There is a theology that we can explore there. The idea that, like, no, people know what is ethical and what is moral because they have intellectual convictions as to what that might look like. But their impulses don't allow them to actually follow through with what they think is right. So that's why Kant makes a really interesting argument that the only time someone is immoral is when they're irrational. And people are irrational because they're overcome by their quote unquote passions, like anger and like greed and like lust and like jealousy. When a person is really, really angry, they cannot access their reasoning faculty, and therefore they cannot access ethics. So according to Kant and to many scholastic Christian masters before him, the passions are dangerous because they hijack your ability to act accordingly, according to will, according to law, according to scripture, etc., etc. It's a kind of intoxication. So you'll find that many traditions argue that intoxication, whether by drink or by drugs, or whether by strong emotions, those are all the same. All forms of intoxication are quote unquote bad. But in this text, which we're going to study, you'll see the goddess is perpetually drunk, especially in the second episode. As Mahalakshmi, she's constantly drinking. And as a drunkard, she wages war against the demons. So the idea of intoxication becomes reclaimed, weirdly enough. Although in most traditions, passions and intoxication makes your life worse by hijacking your will. So there's an ambiguity here. Basically, I want to point to this ambiguity. Now, if you're a utilitarian, you justify ethics on the base of like the total net good. If you're a deontologist, like Kant, you would justify ethics on some other means, like rationality, like the categorical imperative, or maybe on scripture. Right? Now, in the Bible, like in the Old Testament, there's this idea that Abraham is commanded by God to kill his own son. That's really problematic because killing is wrong, right? Thou shalt not kill and whatnot. But killing your own son, not only is that wrong, that's like horrifically wrong and undesirable. Like, why would anybody want to do that who loves his own son? It's terrible. It's a terrible thing to be asked to do. And Kierkegaard being one of the early existentialists in the Western tradition, he was just like, how do you know that this is actually God? He makes it an epistemological issue, not even an ethical one. He's just like, if a voice in the sky tells you to kill your child, can you even be sure that it's your child? Wait, was this Kierkegaard or Kant? I'm sorry. Somebody in the Western philosophical tradition, I'm forgetting now, argued that you can't know that it's God. And so he makes this a more epistemological sort of question. If some voice in the sky told you to kill your child and said it was God, would you do it? And you would say, no, God would never ask me to do such a thing. But then again, what can you know of God? Because if ethics come from God, then your idea of ethics might be contradicted by what God wants of you. Yeah, how do you know it wasn't Satan? How do you know it wasn't a spirit or something? But if you knew it was God and God herself were to tell you, take your child up to the hill and kill him. And in this story, God appears and God's like, wait, whoa, that's crazy. I didn't think you were going to do it. I was just testing you. Wait, stop. Here's a ram instead, right? Like, so in this version of the story, Abraham doesn't actually have to go through with the Isaac sacrifice. He gets a ram instead. But what if God is like, just like saying, okay, do it. And he watches you and then you do it. And you're like, wait, bro, wait, whoa, wasn't there supposed to be a ram or something? And God's like, no, I actually wanted you to kill Isaac. Like, what the fuck? Would you do it? And what we're arguing for here is that morality is whatever God says. And divine command theory is so important because a lot of morality comes from what's there in the book. The book says X, and so X is right. And not X would be wrong. It's such a remarkable claim that like ethics can be traced back to the command of God. What is right to do is what God has enjoined us to do. This is called divine command theory. And you guys, this is not only there in the Western tradition. Even in the Tantras, there's this idea actually that like things can be true or good and worth doing because Lord Shiva said we should do them in the Tantras. So much of the Tantras are premised upon religious axioms. They're true because they're there in the book. And the book means the collection of agamas or tantras that are attributed to Lord Shiva. So often Lord Shiva, sometimes Ma Kali, sometimes Parvati, right? Like the author of the tantra is divine. So unlike the Vedas, which have no authorship, the Tantra has an authorship, and that authorship is God. Just like the Bible or the Quran is the recorded word of God. And so if Lord Shiva says so, it must be true, it must be right. So much of our reasoning in Tantra is a scriptural kind of reasoning based on axioms that we find in the Vedas, in the Upanishads, in the Tantras, in the Agamas, in the Nigamas, etc. So whenever you encounter a philosophical spiritual tradition, if it is indeed a religious tradition, you can't quite get away from this type of thinking, this type of reasoning based on scriptural or religious axioms. So this introduces the idea of divine command theory. Something is morally right if God said so. Now, when you look at the agamas, this gets complicated because God seems to be saying different things at different times to different people. So you get contradictory claims, not just in the agamas, also in the Vedas, in the Upanishads. The reason why there are such diverse philosophical traditions in India is because the same holy book can be understood in many different ways by different people. So Shankara's Gita is very different from Ramanuja's understanding of the Gita. And both of them will comment upon the Upanishads in a very different way. So this introduces, I think, a very important point, a kind of moral ambiguity. Is it utilitarianism? Is it deontology? What do you make of the is-ought fallacy? Is it a kind of divine command theory? What is the morality of the Chandi? And you find that again and again, your concept of morality, your idea of the good, your idea of the bad, constantly is getting challenged. You forget who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. The Devas act like Asuras, and the Asuras, like Prahlada, for instance, act like Devas. And so you don't know what makes a god or a demon a demon. You just see powerful beings fighting among one another. And then you see the Divine Mother. And this Divine Mother seems to be equally on both sides, and yet she transcends them both. So when you come to the Śākta theology, ethics becomes complex. Because here it's not what God tells you to do, it's what God just does through you. And God is acting through quote unquote bad guys as much as she is acting through quote unquote saints. Both of them have a part to play in her Leela, all for the sake of her own self amusement or delight. And it's this is a terrifying view to some people because it sounds a bit like nihilism or it sounds a bit like fatalism or something like that, but nothing of the sort. Because submitting to the Divine Mother's will, as the Chandi will tell you, will always be quote unquote good. Because those who take refuge in you, O Mother, in other words, those who surrender to your will, become a refuge for others. So ultimately, it seems to be good, but we dare posit this idea that it might be good, not in the way that your mind understands. So, what your mind understands as good, God is even gooder, even better than that, because God does not subscribe to your mental superimposition of good and bad, of right and wrong. God thwarts those ideas because God is truly both and neither and something much more. So in the Chandi, you get this idea that God is not a creator separate from the world. God herself becomes the world and all quote unquote created beings. You get the idea that these created beings don't have free will as such, being inseparable from the one from whom they emerge. They instead enact her will upon the world. Devya yaya tatamidam jagadatma shaktya. One of my favorite lines. Nishesha deva gana shakti samuha murtya tamam bikama kela deva maharshi pujyam bhaktyanata vidadhatu shubhani sanaha. Oh mother, you are worthy of being praised by the gods and great seers because you yourself spread this world out by virtue of your own power. In other words, you can imagine that the devas and the asuras are arranged like chess pieces on a board, and she is playing both sides, the way a young girl might play with her dolls, or a young boy or young person might play with his dolls. Just like that, the goddess is playing with us because she is us and she's playing through us. So we get the idea of a deity whose will is absolute morality, beyond our idea of deontology and utilitarianism or good or bad or pure or impure, what the book says or what the book doesn't say. So we get that. We get the idea of a creator who is her creation. The transcendent is the immanent. And yet, you get the idea of promise and protection and devotion. So, even within this non dual paradigm where God is the devotee, there's still room for the devotee making a plea to God. So, many of the hymns that you're going to encounter in this text are like begging the goddess to come when we're in trouble. So, in the second hymn, after the hymn, the goddess gives us a boon. She says, "Whosoever chants this hymn, I am beholden to come. It's my promise. Whenever you chant this hymn, I'll come and I'll protect you." What a claim. And so who is being protected? Who is protecting? Like, why is there a sense of devotion and duality when indeed the goddess is her own devotee? So that's something worth questioning and exploring. So what we get is a devotional text that at the outset superficially seems like a battle between good and evil. You get the idea that she is Deva Karya Samudyata. She is on the side of the gods because that's one of her names, the one who helps the just or the gods. But interestingly, sometimes she helps them by thwarting them. So ultimately, she's on your side, but maybe not in a way that the mind can understand. So she's Shri Mata, the mother from whom comes the world, in whom the world is manifested. She's Shri Maharagni, the one who rules over the world, but not as a tyrant, nor even as a passive onlooker or as a prima mobile. She is actively involved in the world as everything that happens from moment to moment. That's why, Sri Ramakrishna didn't like this idea of science as mechanism. Because somebody once said, they were all sitting in the room and they were talking about electricity, which was a new idea at that time in 1882. So one of the boys was talking about electricity, and Sri Ramakrishna tried to use the word in English, but of course he didn't speak much English. He only knew a smattering. And so he said, "What is this electic you're talking about?" He always pronounced it that way. And he's like, "Tell me something about your electic." And so they talked about lightning. And they said lightning always strikes the highest point. And Sri Ramakrishna said, "But that's not true though. When I was a child, I saw lightning strike a roof that was clearly not the highest roof in my village." Now, he's a true scientist. He's using his powers of observation to notice a discrepancy in an absolute claim about how electricity works. Isn't that beautiful? Ernest Rutherford, and actually not even Ernest Rutherford, his assistant was able to posit the existence of atoms because of such a discrepancy. So real science is willing to question all of these absolute claims. And so the boys who were learning at the English schools at the time, they had learned things about electricity, but these were generalizations about the way that lightning and electricity works. And Sri Ramakrishna disputed it. He said, no, it doesn't work that way. Your laws, you're positing these things as laws, but you can't say that these things are laws because there are exceptions. So Sri Ramakrishna said, you told me electricity strikes the highest building, but I saw it strike a roof much lower than the highest roof in my neighborhood, in my village. And then Saradananda, he said, Sharat Maharaj said, oh, that's an exception. And Sri Ramakrishna says, if there are exceptions, don't call it a law. Isn't that beautiful? And then one time, Mathur Babu told him that God will never transgress her own laws. For instance, and Mathur Babu gave an example, a white hibiscus will never grow on a red hibiscus tree. These are two strains of hibiscus flowers, and they're two separate plants. You won't find white and red hibiscus growing on the same stem. That very day, I think that very day or within short time, Sri Ramakrishna went out to pluck flowers for the worship of Ma Kali in the temple. He triumphantly brought back a stem with two flowers, one red and one white. Is that really beautiful? And some people say, oh, this is a miracle. Sri Ramakrishna manifested a miracle. But no, now we understand in modern science that such a thing can happen actually. So that it's not out of the ordinary, but this is important. The ordinary does not necessarily posit a set of indefatigable, inviolable, absolute laws that always must happen mechanistically because our mind says so. Actually, the universe is much more random than we think. And this is what we're discovering on a quantum level. Not to speak as if I know anything about quantum mechanics, but what I hear from people who are in that field is that they're disturbed by the level of randomness that they see on the quantum level. And so the claim that we're making is that maybe everything just happens by the mother's will, not by some scientific law or imagination. And I'm not saying that that will is different from science. Science is just one way to, or the modern scientific explanations of how the universe works is one way to investigate that will. But the more you investigate it, the more like you realize how fucked you are in trying to understand it. So one great philosopher said that you would think by now science, or what we call science, would have approached a kind of absoluteness, a kind of completeness, and a kind of certainty about the universe. But if there's anything that we've learned from the 20th century, it's this. Math is incomplete, according to the 1930s paper by Gödel called Incompleteness Theorems. Physics is uncertain, according to Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And the world is relative, not absolute, according to Einsteinian relativity. So the greatest names in science and in mathematics and in physics have all proved to us one thing and one thing only: uncertainty, incompleteness, and relativity, sorry. So therefore, you cannot say that laws are absolute or fixed. You cannot say the universe is mechanical. Far from it. The universe is a dynamic, living expression of a living God whose will is manifesting itself in each and every moment according to her own spontaneous delight. So that's the Śākta claim, that God is transcendent. She exists beyond the world, but she exists in the world as the world. And in the world as the world, she functions in every occurrence in the world. Whether you call that good or bad or just or unjust, whatever happens is her lila, but she is actively involved in that lila from moment to moment. So when you encounter the goddess in the text, you find that she's a very playful and joyful figure that's seemingly enjoying what she's doing. She's having fun. Garja Garja Shana Muda, she says, as she takes a swig from her wine cup, her brimming chalice, which the god of the sea, Varuna, gave her. She's drunk, and she says in her inebriation, Garja Garja Shana Muda, oh fool, roar, roar however much you want. Soon the very gods will be here praising me in the very spot that you are now throwing your tantrum. What a remarkable claim. So the point I want to make now is that in the Chandi, you find a creation theory that's very interesting. You find a theory of God, a theology, along with its respective metaphysic and axiological claims, like ethical claims that are very unique. But I want to come to one final point now before we plunge into the Chandi. Insofar as we're exploring parameters of the Chandi, the final point I want to make is this. The Chandi is very much, like the Tantric world, interested in linguistic mysticism. So insofar as the Chandi posits that the world is real as sound. Shepo jnanam cha sankyam gati nado iti kramat kalanam Kala Sankarshini iti abhidhiyate. She is Kali. She is named Kali because she projects the world, because she knows the world, because she delimits and how do you translate Sankhya? It literally means counts, but it means to like define or to delimit or to divide. Yes, she creates the world by throwing it out, she holds the world by knowing it, and she plays in the world by dividing it. And therefore, she is the sequence known as Kali, who is dynamism and who is resonance, sound. So when we talk about Kali as the dynamic aspect, as God in motion, we're actually talking about sound. And when we talk about sound, we're naturally talking about language. So sound, nada, and varna, and matrika, and malini, language becomes really, really, really important in the Chandi. In fact, if language wasn't important, the Chandi wouldn't really have value as a sadhana. The very fact that language is power is why we chant the Chandi, because we say the Chandi is a collection of 700 verses in which many mantras are present. So if you do nothing else in your spiritual life but chant the Chandi cover to cover, verse to verse, everything that you need will come because there are mantras there. And there are ways to derive the bijas. There are ways to like simplify the Chandi. There's one bija mantra for each chapter, you could say, or there's one mantra for the whole Chandi. There are ways to like essentialize the Chandi, of course, but the Chandi itself, the text, the Devī Māhātmyam, is but a compendium of mantras. And what is a mantra? What is a vidya? But a kind of sound, a kind of configuration of vowels and consonants. And so therefore, language and linguistic mysticism and God as mantra, God as vidya, God as sound becomes one of the most important philosophies, not just in the Chandi, but in the Tantric tradition as a whole. So we're saying that words have meaning, not only because they point to some reality beyond themselves, but because the words are composed of phonemes, and that this universe is nothing but various expressions of those aksharas, which are eternally pure. So even in a kind of platonic sense, these aksharas vibrate in a stainless way, and from them, the world that you see around you can be generated. It's a mystical claim. Don't think it's just linguistic determinism. It's not just that, oh, I only experience what I have language for. I mean, that too, that's included. But this is somewhat deeper. It's a mystical claim that the world is vibration. And I mean, come on, you guys, this is 1000 BCE. Right? This text is probably, I don't know, I don't want to date it because it can get very complicated. There's so many different datings. But it probably comes from a very, let's just say it's from a long time ago, way before quantum mechanics, way before string theory or anything that we know now about modern physics. And they were positing that the universe is vibration, it's spanda. And what is vibration? Gatinado iti kramat. This temporality, this spatiality is a pulsating, throbbing field of power. And it can be accessed by language, through language, because its expression is language. So I, u, ra, la, I, o, au, ang, aha. The secrets of the entire universe can be understood in just these 16 sounds. And of course, on another night, we can explore that. There's a whole chapter devoted to it in Abhinavagupta's Tantra Loka. And there's a whole text called the Nandikeshvara Tantra. If you're interested in this stuff, I would recommend that you check out Panini. There's one chapter there called Shiva Sutra, very difficult Sanskrit text, and Nandikeshvara Tantra, which is based off of Panini's Shiva Sutra. Not to be confused, mind you, with the Shiva Sutra that we commonly talk about attributed to Vasugupta. So I'm not talking about the Kashmir Shaiva Shiva Sutra of 850 AD. I'm talking about Panini's Shiva Sutra. You know, because there, Lord Shiva plays his Damaru takata takata ta, and then through that, Panini gets his vision of sound. And language is based on the divine revelation of God, of reality. And so the elements, they're all coded into the language, you know, the explanation of how these syllables create the universe is explained in chapter 3 of Abhinavagupta's Tantra Loka. And just to give you a hint, plus E makes A, and A is a downward pointing triangle. And then A plus a few other letters makes an upward pointing triangle. So when you say I is essentially a downward pointing triangle plus an upward pointing triangle, which means it's the Shatkona, the 6-pointed triangle, or what is sometimes called the Star of David. Aim is a bija mantra attributed to creation. The male genitals are sometimes depicted as a triangle because the two testicles and the penis make a kind of upward pointing triangle. Whereas the female genitals are sometimes depicted as a downward pointing triangle. So when the male genital and the female genital come together, metaphorically you could say it's two triangles, one on top of the other. And the two triangles, upward and downward, represent creation because from that comes a child, etc., etc. Do you see how deep this goes? The yantras that we use are visual depictions of the mantras that we chant because the phonemes that make up those mantras resonate both as sounds and as visions, as images. So we're talking about a linguistics that covers also the realm of vision. Pashanti, as well as Madhyama and Vaikari. I mean, it's really, really sophisticated stuff. Anyway, and then we get into the consonants, and we think of the consonants as wombs, and we think of the bijas as seeds, and the vowels entering into the consonants, and the whole world is this ecstatic interplay of vowels and consonants, making mantra so important because it has a creative power. So that's why when you watch popular depictions of magic, there's a big emphasis on the word, right? It's Leviosa, Hermione will say in Harry Potter, because you have to pronounce it correctly. You know, if you say Wingardium Leviosa, nothing will happen, or something weird will happen. And I think Ron, I think casts a spell wrong or something, or I think his wand is broken or something. And then instead he has to, like, he curses someone to eat slugs, and he himself eats the slugs or something. Or there are all these instances of magic going wrong because the word is not attended to, or the process is not attended to. So Hermione is careful to point out that it's Leviosa. Similarly, when we chant something, we recognize that there's power to the word. In Lord of the Rings, in the second installment, Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn are, I think, in Fangorn Forest, and they, I think, are about to encounter who they think is Saruman, the White Wizard, who, of course, in the second episode is known to be a bad guy. Now, Aragorn, he, as the leader of the group, turns to his two friends and says, "Don't let him speak." Right? He's afraid that Saruman will put a spell on them if only he gets a chance to speak. So Aragorn is like, "Okay, there's no way we can fight this guy. We're gonna try though. Just whatever you do, don't let him get a word in, because then we'll be screwed." And so the idea of being able to speak is integral to the use of magic, even in popular culture, even in popular literature and film and music. Like, we depict the wizard, or the not to use this word pejoratively, but the witch as somebody who uses words of power to create change within and without. This is literally the foundation of the Vedas. Like, the whole Vedic civilization is premised upon this realization, first and foremost, that words carry power, and when used correctly, they can create change within and without, psychical transformation and physical transformation. So, mastery over language, over word, is very important. So, that's why chanting is so important. Um, Natalie, it's good to see you. Nice to see you so much today. But Natalie is making a good point here, this Nitya Leela Devi. So, Nitya Leela is saying that, like, when we learn to chant mantras, aren't we told by our gurus to chant the mantra inwardly? And this is where we get into something really profound. The word is understood not only what as what is being spoken. I think even in Harry Potter, there's like a whole like arc where they're trying to learn how to say spells without saying them, right? I think. Isn't there a whole bit like that where it's like really good wizards are able to say spells without actually articulating them? And even in that episode in Lord of the Rings, it's like Gandalf, who ultimately, sorry to spoil it for you, the white wizard turns out to be Gandalf. He is able to use magic without speaking. You know, Aragorn's sword becomes too hot for him to hold or something like that. And it's true that magic comes through language, but it's not true that language is only what is articulated by the lips and the tongue. So, see, we're arguing for language here on a very deep level, and we even go so far as to say at least four levels. Three in the Shabda Brahmavada of Vakya Padiya, but in the Shaiva world, four levels. One is a spoken word, Vaikari. Next is the mental word, Madhyama, and then comes the mental transmental world of visions, Pashanti. And that was it for Vakyapadiya. But then in the Shaiva world, we add one more, Para. So these are four levels in which language articulates itself. So when I say a mantra, there is a corresponding thought, there is a corresponding vision, arguably, and there is a corresponding reality. And that reality is, as Wilson G is pointing, Zachary G is pointing out, is Om. And within Om is every other sound. It's remarkable, isn't this remarkable? And there's so many ways to interact with language in this tradition, but the only claim I want to make now is this. This is the most important claim. This text is a text of mantras. Its value is not necessarily in its meaning. Its value is in its phonemic, can I say phonemic? Phonemic power. That is in the sound. And not just the sound as you hear it on the lips and on the tongue, but as you feel it within the mind and within the heart. Linguistic mysticism, you'll see, is at the heart of this world and its understanding of manifestation and of course of the goddess. So the goddess is sound. She is Tvam Swaha, Tvam Swadha, Tvam Hi, Vashatkara Swaratmika, Sudha Tvam Akshare Nitye, Tridha Matratmika Sthitha, Ardha Matra Sthita Nitya, Yanucharya Visheshataha. So this is the opening salvo in the Brahma Dikrita Devi Sutihi, the first prayer that we hear to the Divine Mother. I'm particularly fond of it. I'm especially fond of it. I chant it all the time because in this hymn is contained some of the most refined philosophies in our tradition. So here's what it says: Tvam, you, are Swaha. Swaha is one of the most important mantras in the entire tradition because the Vedas require that mantra to make oblations to the gods. So whenever you offer something into the fire and you mean to offer it to the gods, you say Swaha. But the Vedas are not only interested in worshipping gods, they're also interested in worshipping the mains or the ancestors. So here you would say Swadha. But there are other mantras like Vashat, which is a weapon mantra, which you use to destroy evil spirits or things like that. And there's Vaushat, which is a feminine version of that, where you can offer flowers and libations. There's so many different mantras. Swaha, Swadha, Vashat, Vaushat, Hum, Pat, all these different mantras. Now, the claim is that you, mother, Tvam Swaha, Tvam Swadha, Tvam Hi, Vashatkara Swaratmika. You are Swaha, and you are Swadha, and you are Vashat, as well as all the other mantras that we've encountered in the Vedas, in the Puranas, in the Tantras. O mother, you are Swaratmika, you are of the form Swara, of all sound and all breath and all consonants. Sorry. Tvam swaha, tvam sudha, tvam hi vashatkara swaratmika. Sudha tvam akshare nitye. You are the nectar of the imperishable phoneme. Sudha tvam akshare nitye. So, a is the first letter in the matrika order. Ksha is the last letter. A plus ksha indicates all the letters. A, I, u. But aksha can also imply akshara, meaning imperishable. Akshara. She is Akshara. She is eternal because the letters A through Ksha are eternal. How beautiful is this? You see how we can derive so many meanings from the Chandi just with this background, with this philosophical understanding. Akshare nitye. And more importantly, Tridha matratmika stita. So to Zachary Wilson Jew's point here, Om is composed of the primordial sounds A, U, and Ma. Just like red, yellow, and blue are primary colors from which every other color combination can emerge, just like that, A, U, and Ma represent primordial sounds. A in the back of the throat, U in the middle of the mouth, Ma in the lips. The totality of sounds articulatable by the throat and by the tongue and by the lips and by the teeth are all in between A, U, Ma. So take the gutturals. Ka, ka, ga, gha, nga, and then move up into the palatals. Cha, cha, ja, ja, nya. Move a little further up. Ta, ta, da, da, na. Move even further up into the dentals. Ta, ta, da, da, na. Moving into the lips. Pa, pa, ba, ba, ma. Now these are all the sounds, arguably, that you can make with your throat. And they're all contained in these three moments, in the back of the throat, in the middle of the mouth, or in the lips / teeth. So a, u, ma contain within them all sounds, just like red, blue, and green. Sorry, red, blue, and yellow contain within them all colors. Right? Isn't it so crazy? Like all this stuff, it's so deep. It's like layers and layers and layers. It's like we're Alice and we're really falling into the rabbit hole now. It's like just there's no end. I mean, this is, you have to remember, a 9,000-year-old tradition. We've had a lot of time to do philosophy, like we've been reasoning and reasoning and reasoning and practicing and practicing and practicing for so long that there's so many layers that have been added. This too is one. As we're discussing now, we're talking about Einsteinian physics and Newtonian physics. We're talking about quantum mechanics. And we're talking about Kant and Kierkegaard and all these things, which our ancestors maybe didn't have access to because those guys hadn't written their stuff yet. And now we're talking about it. And so we're adding something to the tradition with our modern interpretations. Many people have read this text, Mueller and Levi Strauss and others. I mean, so many people who've been studying the Chandi because of its power, its symbolic and mythological power, that what we're encountering here is a living, growing tradition that's had at least 9,000 years, if not much more, to develop. You know, I mean, that itself is so cool that you guys were about to study a text now, Jaima, Jaima, Jaima. We're about to chant a text that is so ancient, that arguably might be the most ancient religious sentiment we as humans have ever had. I mean, just think about that. This might be the oldest form of religion that any human being has ever participated in. And here we are now in 2025, many of us in America, we're about to like uncover one of the oldest religious expressions of all time. It's like remarkable. Anyway, Tvam swaha, tvam sada, tvam vashatkara swaratmika, sudha tvam akshare nitye tridha matratmika. So you, mother, are the three syllables, a, u, ma. But you're also something beyond that, the fourth, which is called the silence in which the sound moves. So you are ma, but you are turiya also. So Trida Mātratmika Sthita. Ardhamatra Sitanitya Yanucharya Visheshataha. So all of that, the opening few verses of the Brahma Dikrita Devi Sutihi describes the linguistic mysticism that I've been harping on for a while now. So put all of this together, what you get is a text that is somewhat morally ambiguous, that argues that God is both good and bad and something far beyond those mind-based dualities, that God is not just the creator, but also the one who is in the world as the world, whose playful and creative will is manifesting in each and every moment. But this is my favorite idea. God is also the destroyer. So God reabsorbs the world back into the source herself from which it sprung forth. So now we get the idea of God as Kali. So I'm going to transition now from the Lalita Sahasranama to the Kali Sahasranama. Bye, Jericho. Jaima, Jaima, Jaima. Oh, so sad, you guys. Sorry, I've been speaking for like an hour and a half, but I'm just getting started. Like, I'm warming up. I'm so sorry. Anyway, we'll take a Q&A before I start chanting the Chandi with you all, but let's just get through a little more philosophy, if you don't mind, a little more setup, a little more parameters, and then we'll get into the stuff. So there's Sudha. Sudha tvam akshare nitye. Tridha matratmika stita. So, thank you, Nitya Lila. You have to say that because somebody has to at least. So now here's the claim that God is in the world as the world. She plays within the world, which is the world that she herself created by becoming, but she also devours it at the end. So the first hymn of the Chandi will say this, that you created the world, but you also devour it. Tvam matsante cha sarvada. At the end, you consume it all. So often we think of God as creator. We don't like to think of God as destroyer. We like to think of God as creative. We don't like to think of God as destructive. The whole Kali sadhana is an attempt to recognize divinity in what the mind is most frightened of: endings, dissolution, death, decay. So now we think of God as the devourer. So what is Kali's true name? I mean, all her names are her name, but think of her more ancient names. They will terrify you, and they should terrify you. Their very sounds should evoke, I would even argue, an epigenetic sense of dread and fear. If anybody's ever been in a place where it's so dark that you can't even see your own hand if you've held it up in front of your face, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Many of you have been in a place that's so emotionally dark that you know what I'm talking about. There is a point in your life where everything has failed you, when you are truly all alone. And until you know what it's like to be truly alone, it's very difficult to understand what this Kali is. She is the cry of the jackals in the Battle Creek, Michigan forest at night. The blood-curdling sound of jackals. She is the despair of losing a loved one. She is the horror of the world being devoured into the void, the black hole that spreads and spreads and spreads and draws even light into itself. So her name, one of her oldest names, it's terrifying. Krisha. Krisha, just think about the sound of that. Krisha means the emaciated one. So when we think of the goddess, we like to think of her as full-breasted. Usually when we think of, the figures of the goddess that we find, the big breasts. Because fertility, big belly, gata sthap, kind of like a lambodara, like the big belly means pregnant, fertile, like that. So the goddess is supposed to be a buxom, rounded hip, big-breasted, big-bellied sort of figure. And that makes sense. The goddess is that. She's not that. She's obviously fertility and abundance and nourishment and nature. And so many goddess religions are about that, are about the rap video type aesthetic of woman. Like you have to be like representing an ideal of health and beauty, or the Dark Ages idea of like a beautiful woman is a big woman. Obviously, because she's healthy, she's radiant, ruddy. That's one very important depiction of the divine feminine. A woman with child whose breast is swollen. That is beautiful. But also, that's not the only depiction of the mother. The other depiction is unfortunately, I don't want to say suppressed, but more esoteric. The underworld goddess, Persephone and Hecate, and the idea of God is somewhat darker, the god that destroys. So her name Krisha means emaciated. The stark contrast to the typical mother worshipping tradition's depiction, right? So like here, she's skinny, her breasts are pendulous, she's a crone. If you have Irish heritage, this is interesting because those who are like Scottish or Irish, it's interesting to note that that place was at one time called Caledonia. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but named after again, I might be pronouncing this wrong, forgive me, the Kailiak. And the Kailiak, unsurprisingly, bears a resemblance to Kali as this harvest goddess who is a crone, or like the Anmorgan. The idea of like Anmorgan or Kailiak is very, very close to this idea of Krisha, if not one-to-one match, you know. So Krisha, yeah, isn't that interesting? Krishna. But I'll give you an even scarier name. Krishna is scary because it means emaciated. Think of goddess as with pendulous breasts, emaciated, her ribs are showing, and she has fangs, and she's not happy. You know, think of a goddess who's irritable and angry and so hungry. Can you think of a goddess who just is insatiable in her appetite, so insatiable that she will eat you? I mean, I'll paint a scary picture. Imagine your mother comes home one day, but she doesn't make you lunch. Instead, she eats everything in your kitchen. And you're startled because you expect her to come home and make you a PB&J, but she doesn't do that. Today, she's in a strange mood. She starts eating everything in the kitchen, and that scares you. But then you realize what's even scarier is that it's not enough. I think I'm working. This sounds like a short story that we're working on impromptu right now. I think Asha and other literary people in the room might appreciate this. So this could be fun. Even Viranatha, maybe this could be a fun short story. I imagine your mother comes home and she eats everything. That could be the title. Your mother comes home and eats everything. So she eats everything in the kitchen that's edible. Then it gets worse. Then she starts eating things that are not edible. Did you guys see that Cronenberg film? Crimes of the Future. What is it? You know, where there's the group of people who eat plastic. Do you know what I'm talking about? The movie opens, it's so tragic. The movie opens with a young boy who's like chewing on a bucket in the bathroom, and his own mother like suffocates him to death because she thinks he's an abomination. In one sense, the movie might be about being gay and coming out as gay, because in one sense, maybe the people who eat plastic are abominations because they're different from everyone else in society. And the protagonist, Viggo Mortensen, who also plays Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, he discovers at the end that I shouldn't spoil this. I'm spoiling it. Sorry, but it's a great film. I love Cronenberg, all body horror type kind of stuff. It's great. Anyway, in that film, there are these plastic eaters. So imagine your mother has eaten everything in the house that's edible. Now she starts eating the furniture, all the plastic and all the furniture. And you're like, Mom, stop. What are you doing? Yeah, please write it. It sounds kind of cool, right? And you're like, Mom, stop. Don't. What are you doing? Yeah, somebody who can write this. I think this is cool. Eat it. And then and you're like, don't eat it, Ma. Don't eat this. This is, you can't eat it. This will be bad for you. And she doesn't give a fuck what you think. She's in a mood, and she starts eating the furniture. And you're terrified, and you're like in one corner calling for help, but there's no one there but you and your mom. And she's finished eating everything in the room. And now she starts eating the drywall and the floor and everything. And soon you realize there's nothing left to eat but you. And so she catches your leg, and your own mother starts to devour you, starting with your toes, like eating you. Imagine how horrified you would be. This is a person who you go to for support, from whom you came, and now you're returning to your source. Just think about that. Yeah, and there's also that famous Goya painting of Saturn eating his children. But remember, Saturn is the bad guy, right? In that like Greek arc, like they're titans, and you're supposed to fight Kronos and whatnot. They're bad, and the gods like the New Testament help you with the Old Testament depiction. Now you have Kali, or sorry, you have your mother in this case eating you. Ah, Krisha, she's emaciated. She just can't get enough. Until she devours you, she won't be satisfied. And think of the Black Widow, think of the praying mantis. I mean, this is the bhava that we're entering into when we talk about Kali. It's no joke. Everyone wants to censor her, make her something she's not. But she's terrifying to the mind, and she should be. She is that void which devours the universe. To know a blackness that black, Vanta black is nothing, pales in comparison, pardon the pun. So, Kali is the devourer. She's Krisha. A scarier name, Kali, Kala, Sankarshini. Sankarshini means the one who devours, Sankarshini. But an even scarier name, an older name, arguably, Chamunda. Chamunda or Chandi or Chandika. Do you feel the terror in it? Just by saying that name, you should feel something there. Chanda, Chanda, Chandika, Chamunda. If you say it correctly, and obviously I'm not saying it as perfectly as one might, but with the tongue striking the upper palate, Chanda, Chandika, Chamunda, one of the names that Arjuna in the Mahabharata uses when he's told to pray to Durga is this: Chandi, Chandika, Kali, Kapalini, Karali. Terrible names. Karali means the frightful, fierce one. So Kali, Karali. So Kali Kala Sankarshani, this means the one who devours Kala and Kala, who devours time and space. She is Kali, but also she is Kapalini, the one who carries a skull. She is also Krisha, the emaciated one. And above all, she's Chandi, Chandika. So when we think of Kali, we think of, by the way, the word Chanda means fierce. Chanda, Prachanda. When you think of Chinnamastaka, Chinnamasta's opening Sahasranama names are Chanda, Prachanda, Ghora, Mahagora, like that, like fierce, scary, etc., etc. So we must not forget this, that she is scary and terrifying. And in the Chandi, you're going to see a lot of violence. That's one thing. When people start reading the Chandi, I think Daile was making a point. He was like, fuck, this stuff is really kind of 18, it's R, it's rated R. There's a lot of erotic themes, but I think arguably there are more violent themes than erotic themes. Obviously, there are erotic themes, but there are rivers of blood, so much decapitation. It's not just the demons that get decapitated. A lot of animals get killed too in this thing. There's so much bali, there's so much blood. And one of the names that Arjuna uses, Sri Arjuna worships Durga in the Mahabharata to win the war. He uses the name Mahisha Rudira Priya or something, one who is fond of the blood of buffaloes. Obviously, a reference to Mahishasura, but just one who loves drinking blood. It's remarkable. I just saw the new Conjuring film, the latest installment in the franchise. Big fan of the franchise. And there's a scene where one of the leading actors, she gets possessed by the demon of the film, and she comes downstairs and there's like blood dripping out the corners of her mouth, and she's got this like sadistic, terrifying smile, and she's holding a knife. And when she appears on screen, I'm having a genuine religious sentiment. I'm like, Maha, Srika Dvaya Gala Drakta, Dhara Visburitananam, Ghora Rava Maharaudrim, Smashanalaya Vasinim. And I'm just so excited to see this beautiful woman on screen with blood all over her mouth, holding a knife, ready to kill everyone in the house. And I'm like, this is the goddess I do puja to every single day. And then for a moment, I had this moment of like sobriety when I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with me? I realized the parameters of the movie. I'm like, wait, no, this is bad. It's bad that she's possessed by the demon. It's bad that she's like trying to kill her whole family right now. But I was like, why do I like this so much? And then I realized, what if the Christians are right? I just had this moment where I was like, wait, fuck. What if this is the very Satan worship that the Christians are trying to warn us about, right? Like, I'm like, wait, what if this is just the worship of demons and evil? Like, because this is what we understand to be evil, and here I am being so happy when I see it. Like, are we lost? That's why my April Fool's prank was so funny, right? People really took it seriously, some people. I was like, you guys, I've had a change of heart. Do you remember I sent a letter out to the community? I was like, I'm sorry, I can't believe I've deluded you. How could we ever think that joy can come from worshiping a dark jungle goddess of yesteryear? Like, I'm sorry, please, for my part in deluding you, forgive me, but I've come to the one true God. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm just saying that, like, it's a believable statement for someone to suddenly realize 5 or 10 years into doing this, and they're like, wait, no, this is totally wrong. This is like, but for a moment I had that feeling of like, wait, why am I so excited to see this woman with a knife about to go and kill everyone? This is problematic, right? There's something is wrong with me and with this and with this sadhana, clearly, because every day I'm offering red flowers at the feet of a woman with a knife covered in blood about to kill everyone. We're like, what the fuck? Think about what we're doing. We're offering flowers at the feet of a woman with a knife who is drunk, who is about to kill everyone. So, this idea of worshiping God in that aspect is, of course, very challenging. And you could say a certain adhikari is required for this. It's like, who dares misery love? Who dares hug the form of death? Who dares dance destruction's dance? To him the mother comes. And it goes far beyond mere aesthetic. It's not that, but it's an intuition. It's a religious sentiment that God is also the devourer, with all the implications psychologically of that. So, Shri Mata, Shri Maharagni, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari. She is the one who sits on the shoulders of a lion, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari. Now, I'm quoting from the Lalita Sahasranam. So, these are the 1,000 names attributed to Shri Lalita, the goddess Lalita. But look, Lalita is described as the goddess who sits astride the lion. She is Shri Mata, she is the queen, Shri Maharagni, who rules over the world, and she's Shrimat Singhasaneshwari. She is the one who sits astride the shoulders of a lion. Shri Mata, Shri Maharagni, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari, Chid Agni Kunda Sambhuta, and she is Kundalini Shakti. Kundalini who dwells in the Kunda, the base of the spine. She shoots up the spine. She uncoils and moves up the spine. She's the fire that rises from the fire pit that is the genitals, or which is the uh, perineum or whatever. So, Chid Agni Kunda Sambhuta. These are deeply tantric ideas. But I just want to point to this fact. In the Lalita Sahasranam, Lalita is described as the goddess who sits astride the shoulders of a lion. So, to the point I was making on Monday, Durga is Kali, is Chandika, is Lalita, is the same deity. There's one deity here. But the thing to remember is that she creates, becomes, and devours. She is Bharanath, Ravanath, Vamanath. She holds the world within her womb. She destroys the world by devouring it, and she vomits it back out every time she wants to play again. So this whole thing is like a spider spinning a web and coming to sit within it and maybe withdrawing it back into itself. Can spiders do that? I don't know if they can, right? They can pull the no, they like once it comes out, it's out, right? Okay, imagine a spider that is able to project its web and take it back in, like that. Like or sticking a tongue out and then taking it back in. Just like that, the world comes out when she speaks it, and then it comes back when she swallows it or inhales it back. So this devouring aspect is what we call Kali. So when we look at the Lalita Sahasranam, you have Shri Mata, Shri Maharagni, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari. The Shri Mata sets the tone for the rest of the text. Shri, auspicious, Mata, mother. Lalita is the full moon goddess. You could say it's an emphasis on the beauty, refinement, sensuality, and erotic aspect that we get in the goddess. But Kali is the same goddess looked at from a slightly different point of view. It's a different rasa. So in the Kali Sahasranam, does anybody want to hazard a guess? What is the opening name in the Kali? The opening name in the Lalita Sahasranam is Shri Mata. What is the opening name in the Kali Sahasranam? I mean, there are many versions of the Kali Sahasranam. There's the Kakar, Adi, etc. But I just mean like in the popular one, the one that we chant and that most people chant. What is the... I don't know that most people chant it, just the one that tends to be referenced. What's the first name in the Lalita Sahasranam? That's a really good question, Asha. Like, what is the relationship between sound and silence? D- that's what the question is, right? Like, like sound and silence. What's the relationship between sound and devouring? Just substitute the word devouring with silence. Yeah. Or think in terms of latency and actuality. So sound can be actualized, but it can also be latent. Think of a poet like yourself who, when writing poetry, is actualizing what is always latent in you. When you go to bed tonight, if you can after we chant the Jandi, but if you're sleeping tonight, and I pray that you will be, um, don't you still have poetry within you? As you sleep, there's poetry within you as a latency. And then when you wake up, then you write a poem and then it's actualized. So think of sound actualized and sound latent. And then if you go to bed, in one sense, you withdraw all your poetry. You know, all the poetry. Like it's like almost imagining like every poem you've ever written or spoken, when you go to sleep, sorry, conflating sleep with speak seems important here. But when you go to sleep, all that disappears because your world disappears. So you've taken back your potency and turn it into latency. And then when you wake up, that latency becomes the universe, and then you speak your poems and delight everyone. That kind of sound and silence idea is there. Yeah, good. So Shri Mata, Shri Maharagni, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari, Chidagni Kunda Sambhuta. Like what now would be Kali's first name? If Lalita's first name is Shri Mata, what is Kali's first name? What do you think? What most represents Kali? Just think of it. Yeah, Bhadra Kali is an important name in the Chandi because one of the names that we get of Kali in the Chandi is Bhadra Kali, which is one of the fiercest form of Kali, right? Bhadra Kali, very popular where I grew up in Kerala, very fierce form of Kali. Yeah, time. Kali means time, so you could think it's time. And yes, it has to be something with destruction. But just think now, what would be the best symbol in the, I guess you could say, Indian cultural context, but I would argue in all cultural contexts for time and for death and for destruction? Yeah, void. What would be the best symbol for the void? Your mouth could be the void. Like these are abstract things, right? Think in terms of more tangible things. Like mother is tangible. Mother is an abstract idea, but most of us have a mother. I think all of us have a mother. And black is pretty abstract too. Yeah, that there's another idea that she is the Sakshi, the witness of the Mahapralaya. Yeah, these are all good. These are all really good. And I guess um, it's more literal than all of this. I like all of this because it's a good exercise. You're thinking about these themes that have to do with Kali. But if the first name of Lalita Ma is Shri Mata, then the first name of Kali is Smashana Kalika Kali, Bhadrakali, Kapalini. Yes, Bhadrakali is in there, Kapalini is in there, but it's Smashana. Like nothing captures the idea of time and void and death more tangibly and more concretely than the cemetery. I mean, in this culture, it's cemetery, right? But in our culture, it's cremation ground. But in either case, it's just a place where you go to remember death. It's a place where you go to consign people to the void. You know, it's where you go to see time have its effect. Time devours, it has its meal, but it's the smashan. Like for us, it's a smashan. For time, it's like the restaurant. Time comes there to dine on our bones and feast on our flesh. That's her favorite place. So we in the Kali tradition or in the Shaiva tradition are obsessed with this place because here we find time in full force. We find death. We find void. Yeah, right. Pet cemetery. So, Smashana. The first name for Kali is Smashana Kalika, Kali Bhadrakali, Kapalini. That's what the world ultimately becomes. At the end of all of this, she is Mahapralaya Sakshini, the one who witnesses the dissolution, the reabsorption. Tvam matsante cha sarvada. In the end, she takes it all back into herself. What a profound idea. So isn't that so interesting? Dave is asking, how do you reconcile all of this Shiva Jnana, Jiva Seva idea? And actually, I love this question, Dave, because Kalidasaji, because it's there in the very story of what happens when Swamiji meets Kali. You know, in one sense, he meets Kali and Kali forces him to do all of this work, right? But then look what happens when he meets Kali in Kashmir, in Shir Bhavani. It's kind of scary, actually. After he meets Kali, you know what he thinks of his mission? I mean, his mission, Shiva Jnana, Jiva Seva, all the good work, etc. He thinks it's all hogwash. Like after his experience of Kali, he comes back to the boat, gives marigolds to all the women there, worships them as living manifestations of Devi, and says, no more mission. No more India, no more nationalism, no more Hari Om. He goes so far as to say, no more Hari Om. He says, now it is all Jai Ma. That's it. That was Swamiji's claim. It's just like, oh fuck. I've never done anything. There's no mission. It's just Ma. What he realizes is what Christ said. I can of my own self do nothing. Everything that I do, my Father in heaven does through me. The Christ I don't think had a mission, though he acts like he did. You know, he's doing some work, but he's convinced by his own admission in the gospel that the Father who art in heaven does it through him. So Vivekananda, I think, realizes that who's protecting who, you know. I don't have to protect mother. Mother protects me. In fact, all of this is happening by her own will. She is the moguls destroying the temple. Like she wants to be in the ruins. What does she say to him? This is telling. She said to him, my child, if I wanted, I could have a 7-story or what is it, 9-story golden temple. You know what she said? Allegedly, she said, I want to dwell in the ruins. Like she becomes the Mughal Muslim invaders to destroy the temple, take the image and throw it into the lake, which Swamiji feels is a bad thing. But then Kali comes and tells him in that vision in Shir Bhavani, no, it's a good thing. In fact, it's my thing. You don't know whether it's good or bad. It's my thing. I like this. I like it this way. I want to live in the ruins. So think of the goddess in that form. It's a mood, you know? A mood overcomes Lalita. And when she gets into that mood, she becomes Kali. You know, and that mood is drunken, devouring, destruction. It's when she craves to be in ruin. She wants to dwell in ruin. Once I saw Coleman Barks' translation of Rumi, and there was a line that I loved. It said, come and sit in the circle of friends in the neighborhood of ruin and drink to the dregs with those whose lives are ruined, or something like that. You know, I love this idea of the neighborhood of ruin, and you can imagine that. Then he defined a Sufi, Coleman Barksji. He defined the Sufi as one who wanders wordless and heartbroken. Just imagine that bhava of being wordlessly heartbroken, wandering about. There's an ecstasy to that. There's a freedom to this destruction. Holy Mother once got into that mood. I'm talking about Sri Sarada Devi. This is a very secret story in our tradition, actually. I heard it from a nun. So, what happened was they were trying to secure the land, or this is how I heard it told. They were trying to secure the land in Kamarpukur, which is owned by Sri Ramakrishna's family, so they could build the Ramakrishna mission and mutt there, and actually we visited recently. It was so beautiful, you guys. Like the original Shalagram that Sri Ramakrishna's father found and worshipped is there, continuously being worshipped by members of Sri Ramakrishna's family. A beautiful Bengali artist has rendered these animations, not animations, sorry, paintings. I don't know why I said animations, because they're so animated, of Thakur's life, of Sri Ramakrishna's various episodes in his life, and they're all circling the meditation hall. And there's a Shiva temple. And the best thing about Kamarpukur is you can just like go right into the Shiva temple. The very temple that uh, uh, Sri Ramakrishna's mother sat in front of when the ray of light emitted from the Shiva and went into her womb. That same temple is there. And the name of that Shiva is Yogeshwara or something, the Lord of Yogis. And so to sit there and sit and meditate in that shrine, it's remarkable. And one of my first experiences in that shrine, actually, was so beautiful. I was sitting there, and then people were coming one by one making offerings. And sometimes, they shake the place up a bit because there's so many offerings. And so I was sitting down, and then from the top, a datura flower had rolled off the top of the lingam and it fell right into my palms. I was so happy. I was like, oh, I was so happy the whole day I kept that datura. Until I met somebody who had a tattoo of a datura. Somebody I met had a tattoo of a datura with a hummingbird sipping the datura. And she's a very close and dear friend of mine. So I gave her the datura. But that day was so special just to be in that shrine. But anyway, I digress. So Kamarpukur, now there's a Ramakrishna mission in Mata there. But back then, it was politically difficult to secure the land. The family members said, no, whatever you build will burn. Like there was a whole thing. So this was their threat, right? The people who didn't want the mutt built there, their threat was whatever you guys build, we will burn. This is our land. You can't purchase it from us. You can't have it, etc., etc. Now, they went to Holy Mother and said this. They said, oh, the people who were advocating for the mutt, they went and said to Holy Mother, they told me that if we build anything, they would burn it down. And Holy Mother got into a weird mood, a mood that they'd never seen her in before, or at least that she never publicly displayed. She said, oh yes? She started to get wild. They're going to burn it down? Huh? Okay, let them burn it down. Let them burn it all down then. Burn it. You people start burning it or something like that. And then they said, and this is what the nun told me, she started laughing. And the word that this nun used for her laughter was attahasa. And if you know anything about that word, it's as scary as it sounds. Attahasa. That's one of Mother's names, or it's one of Shiva's names. Attahasa, if I were to translate it into English, the closest translation I've ever come across, actually, I don't know if I'm even remembering it right. Sanderson had a nice translation. I think it's apocalyptic laughter. It's he called it the mad laughter of, and I think the word was apocalyptic destruction or something like that. Attahasa means laughing madly with the tone of apocalypse, of destruction, of Kali. So you can imagine like maniacal laughter, right? So can you imagine Holy Mother Sarada Devi laughing maniacally? But there is this story of her laughing and laughing and laughing maniacally. I heard this story in a different way from a monk. So of course, I trust the nun's depiction more. But the monk told me, similarly in our tradition, he said that this had to do with the World War, actually. Somebody had reported to the Holy Mother that the World War had started, World War One, and Holy Mother started laughing apocalyptically. Both are depicting the same thing, though. Right? It's chilling. And you know what happened? This is what the nun told me. Of course, I'll keep their names anonymous because these stories are, of course, kind of closely guarded in this tradition. But what do you call it? The nun told me that then everyone rushed in and started chanting hymns to appease Ma Sarada because they were worried that if they let her continue in that mood, she would actually destroy the world. She was getting into that mood. So when we look at the Holy Mother, we see Holy Mother, but here she's worshipped in the Kali way. She's worshipped with wine and with bali and all of that stuff, and she likes it. Although in real life, you would say that Holy Mother didn't actually enjoy any of those things, but she's also Kali, never forget. She's Shodashi, she's Kali, she's all these things. She's Durga, Jagadatri, etc. She is the goddess. And this is my conviction that who we're praising in this book, which I'm going to talk about soon, is none other than that Bengali woman. Like that's my genuine conviction and the religious hill that I'm going to die on. That Sri Ramakrishna really is God. And not only that, more importantly to me, his wife is God's wife. that she is actually the goddess that we're talking about, which is a bizarre claim. She was a woman. She was a Bengali village woman, a spiritual personality, but at the end of the day, a woman. So what is it for a woman to be God? I don't know. Give me 300 years, I'll prove it to you. You'll see. We'll see together, right? But anyway, religious axioms and fanatical convictions aside, let's come back to this text. So when she started laughing like that, I actually asked the nun, what was the hymn that they sang? Because I think that would be good to have in your back pocket in case mother starts destroying the world. You're like, Tvam Swaha, Tvam Sada, Tvam Hi. But she said, no, the reminiscence didn't quite describe what hymn it was. Maybe a Bengali folk song, maybe the Chandi, who knows. But they sang the hymn and she calmed down. Anyway, the point I want to make now is just this, that there's a mood, Smashana Kalika Kali, Bhadra Kalika Palini, a mood that Kali enters into, or that mother enters into that we call Kali. So why do we worship that? Why would we ever be interested in invoking that form of Ma? I think those who are very serious about spiritual life, they tend to gravitate towards Kali, not necessarily just, but you have this sense of there's some dramatic potential in Kali. There's some liberation that can be accomplished with the worship of Kali that goes beyond any other kind of liberation because it's apocalyptic. How do you say it in Greek? Anyway, the word means revelation, right? It doesn't mean destruction. Apocalypsia or something. It means to reveal. So the apocalypse of Kali is the apocalypse of the truth being revealed, stripped bare of all the mental machinations that we cover it with. Okay, having said all of this, there is a Lalita Sahasranama, there is a Kali Sahasranama, there are all these various Sahasranamas. It would be nice to think of the Chandi as a kind of Sahasranama, because within it there are 700 verses, and from those 700 verses you can derive 700 names. So Sahasranama being just an abstract number that just means infinite, I think close enough. 700 is pretty much 1,000. It's many names for the one goddess, and the opening name is depending on what version you have. By the way, I should also make this point: the Chandi is very structurally variable. So even though we're reading this Chandi now, different parts of India might structure the stories differently even. They might include stories that your Chandi omits, or they might omit stories that your Chandi includes. So structurally, there isn't just one Chandi. And that's why when people study our traditions, they get very confused because they want everything to be cut and dried, and they want there to be rules, and they want there to be like fixed text. But this is a river, a flowing living stream, and so it's changing all the time. It's very hard to like actually pin down what the Chandi is. So it's like, what actually is this guy talking about? It's like a lot of things actually. I'm talking about at least 9,000 years of a constantly evolving living goddess tradition, which we are now actively developing together in this conversation. So the Chandi itself is a Sahasranam. You can think of it as a devotional text of prayers, and tantrically it's a hymn of names which helps you meditate on the various aspects of the Divine Mother, which covers the whole range that I just discussed. As mother, as the world, as the ruler of the world, as an active participant in the drama of the world, and as the one who devours the world. Of those three, the third is of course my specialty, because that's the stream that I'm in. The sadhana that I do is for Kali. So specifically I'm tuned to that aspect of the Divine Mother which devours, which destroys. But that's only one aspect. There's so infinite aspects of the Divine Mother that you will encounter in the Chandi, and we'll each encounter her in different ways. Each according to our own disposition will glom on to one or the other, which is nice. But I just think it's important to note that we did on Monday and also now that Lalita is none other than Singhasaneshwari, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari, the Durga who rides on the lion. And it's important to note that this is none other than Kali, as the first opening hymn will say, Jayanti Mangala Kali, Bhadra Kali Kapalini, Durga Shiva Kshama Dhatri, Swaha Swadha Namoste. We know she's Durga, she's Kali, but the main point I was making on Monday is that she's Chandi, she's Chamunda. This is her name, Chandika. And of course, Ambika. Oh, it just occurred to me the other day, I was thinking of the Vedic triad, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. And it just occurred to me, there are three central Vedic goddesses. One of them is Ambalika. And I was like, is that the umbilical cord? I don't know for sure, but I think there might be a link between the word Ambalika, which is one of the names of the goddess in the Vedic context, and our umbilical cord. It just seems too eerily similar to dismiss. I don't know though, it's just a conjecture. Anyway, there are these goddesses, Amba, Ambalika, Ambika, and so one of the names we get in the Chandi is Ambika. Ambika is a really important name because it seems to be a very central name. So Kali, Bhadrakali, Chandi, Chandika, Chamunda, Chanda, all of these are names. And all these names refer to the same being. So in chapter 10, I argue, and if you look at the sadhana guide, there's a whole sadhana just premised on chapter 10. Because there we make a point, and the point is this: there's only one. And she says so. She says, Ekaivaham, I am only one. Because one of the demons accuses her of fighting unfairly. It's really funny. He has his hordes and hordes and hordes of demons. And so in order to fight, Mother diversifies herself into the Sapta Matrikas. This is arguably the most esoteric thing about the Chandi. The Sapta Matrikas. Brahmi, Maheshwari, Kaumari, Vaishnavi, Varahi, etc. Here, Narasinghi instead of Mahalakshmi. But this set of 7 mothers, which refers to linguistic mysticism, to all sorts of Tantric esoterica. We don't get into it now. It's just a bit too much. And we did already. Last year, we gave a whole talk on the Ashtamatrikas. We talked about the Saptamatrikas, of which Chamunda is actually one. So there are these 7 mothers. But not only that, it seems like there are so many versions of there's Dharma, the lion. Asha has a new kitten now. It's so cute. And they were looking for names. And Viranatha was quick to suggest Dharma, which is actually a beautiful suggestion because Dharma is the name of the lion that Himavat donates to Ambika. It's her kitty. Her kitty is named Dharma, the lion of Dharma. So in the battle, you see that there are often 3 fellas: the lion, Ambika, and Kali. And they fight together. And then the text has its own understandings of why people are called what they're called. So she's Chamunda, the text says, because she brings the heads of Chanda and Munda. So there's this episode where she decapitates these 2 demons. Kali decapitates these 2 demons. And then she brings the heads to Ambika and throws the heads as haha, here I've brought you a sacrifice. And so wait, what's going on? The mother is talking to herself. There are 2 mothers. And then Ambika, who seems to be the primordial mother, she says, because you have done this, I will give you the name Chamunda, for you are the ones you are the one who brought me the heads of Chanda and Munda. What a beautiful idea that she's giving herself name, she's playing with herself. But you get this idea of there being more than one goddess. And importantly, in the 3rd hymn, Aparajita Sutihi, the setting is the river up in the Himalayas. Parvati is taking a bath. And while Parvati is bathing, the gods are beseeching her with this hymn. Namo Devī Māhātmyam Shivaye Satatam Namaha Namo Prakite Bhadraye Niyata Pranata Smatam. And then what happens is she turns black. She becomes inky black. And Kaushiki comes out, or Ambika comes out. So Parvati transforms, as it were, she, like an octopus almost, spurts ink. And that ink turns into a goddess who then goes to war. It's almost implying that Parvati is still in the Himalayas, having her bath. And she emanates this other deity, a warlike deity, who then goes to the battlefield, who then emanates from her 3rd eye. It says her Bru Madhya means from the middle of her eyebrows. Bru, eyebrow. I don't know. You guys, if you speak English, you speak Sanskrit. I'll just say that. I don't mind saying that. It's like the same language. You know why? Because Sanskrit is the language. It's the paradigmatic language. That you can never escape this fact that it is the prototypical language, because it's not a language. It's not a prakrit. It's the science of all languages, arguably. I'm going far beyond the idea of there being a Proto-Indo-European language. Sanskrit is not a language. It's a system of spiritual philosophy and mysticism. But anyway, coming back to this point, Bru Madhya, from the center of her brow, emits this goddess named Kali. So then you say, what is Kali? She's an emanation of this Ambika, of this Durga. And what is Durga? Technically, Durga hasn't even come yet. At the end of the Chandi, the goddess says, soon there'll be a demon named Durga, and I will kill that guy. And because I killed that guy, you will call me Durga, which makes no sense whatsoever, right? Wait, so you get the name of the demon that you killed? There's a lot to explore here. Durga means fortress, unassailable fortress. She, the goddess, assails the fortress, and kills Durga, the demon named Durga. So therefore she becomes Durga. She is named Durga because she slayed the demon, or she will slay the demon named Durga. That might not have even happened yet, because that's a promise that she makes at the end of the text. Also, she's Shakambari. She says, during a time of drought and famine, I will come as a goddess of gardens. I'll come with fruits and with... So Shakambari is the green goddess who comes and gives nourishment. So and she comes as bees. Is that crazy? One of her incarnation is bees. A swarm of bees. It's really remarkable. But these are all future incarnations, actually. One of my favorite ones is Bloody Tooth, Rakta Danta. She says, I will come and there will be these demons and I'll kill them and I'll drink all their blood. And then my teeth will be red. So then you will call me Rakta Danta. So she gives all these names to herself. And she prophecies, right? What will happen in the future. And so technically Durga hasn't even come yet, but what we're calling Durga is Ambika or Chandi or Chandika. And it seems like she's talking to Kali. And there's Dharma, the lion. What to say of the seven mothers, Brahmi, Kaumari, Aindri, etc. So therefore, one of the demons says, "Mother." He didn't say mother. He just says, "It's not fair. This isn't fair. I've been fighting you, and you have all these other forms, and I'm all alone, and you're fighting." And she says, "No." And she's Ekai Vaham. She says, "You fool, you idiot." This is so important. If you tell me that there are different goddesses in a pantheon, the goddess herself will call you a moron. Right? If you insist on polytheism, if you insist that these are different goddesses, if you insist on a pantheon, you are a moron. That's what I kid you not, that's the language that the goddess uses. She uses that exact word, dushta, or I think previously muda, but here dushta. Oh, it can mean enemy, enemy. Doesn't have to mean dimwit, but it more or less means you stupid idiot. Like, you say there are many, but that's only because you don't have the intellect to see that I am actually one. And so she says so. Ekai Vaham, she says in chapter 10. I am one. In verse 5, chapter, she says, I'm one. And look, she says, look, she said, I am one. She says, there's no one else other than me in this world. I'm one without a second. And look, dimwit, I am now about to withdraw all these forces back into myself. More or less, that's what she said. I'm paraphrasing, but the Sanskrit is the Sanskrit. She used the word dushta there. Right? So she does something interesting. She helps this guy. She shows him the truth. She brings all the forms back. She retrieves all her forms, devours them back, as it were. So this Advaitic discovery comes when Mother devours, when all sound is silenced, as it were, but not silenced, held in potential. When she breathes in, that's when the demon actually becomes liberated. Arguably, it's in that moment that he understands what he's facing, and then he swiftly fights her and dies at her. And then every time the demons die, it's like a remarkable moment where a spear is thrown through the heart. And yeah, I know, Muda means idiot or fool or something. Muda or dushta. Even the words kind of have that claim. Manda, Muda, Dushta. It's even then it's so refined. Even in Sanskrit to like call someone a Muda. Okay, so the goddess likes to use that word a lot. You find it like, roar, oh fool, she'll say. Or, fool, you think I'm many? I'm actually one without a second. She's feisty. She's drunk. She's feisty. And she's about to wreck your shit. She's a really interesting character. But also really protective, really loving. But also she does things for the plot. So she kind of like Narada almost stirs the plot a little bit and gives demons boons and things. It's remarkable. She is an absolute delight. And you can see that she is acting out of delight, spontaneously and freely. It's wonderful. And to identify with the goddess, to be her child, is to think, I too am the child of the Divine Mother. Therefore, I too have this power. I am heir to infinite bliss. And I, like my mother, will act freely out of my own spontaneous delight as an expression of her own innate freedom. I am that. Swatantriya Shakti. Okay, having said that, I want to just now, very briefly, before we chant the Chandi, just give you maybe three or four background myths that I think are kind of important. One of them has to do with Danava. So Danava means the children of Danu. Danu is a figure in the Puranic world, and from Danu comes Ramba and Karamba. These are two primordial demons actually. The word demon, Asura, can be understood as Daitya or Danava. So in the text, the demons are going to be called Danavas, meaning the children of Danu, or they're going to be called Daityas, which means the children of Diti. Diti is the antithesis of Aditi. Aditi is one of the names of the goddess in the Vedic period. Diti, as the antithesis of Aditi, is the one who limits. So a Daitya, as such, is any being that causes limitation. That's what a demon is. Functionally, a demon limits. So if I say us versus them, if I say Democrat and I say Republican, or if I say Athens and Sparta, whatever, this is all demonic. The demonic act is merely the act of delimiting, which doesn't mean it's bad. Again, we're not saying this is bad. We're just saying it's what demons do. They delimit, they break things up. Whereas the opposite of that is unification. If it makes for more non-duality, for more Advaita, for more unification, it's quote-unquote angelic or divine or good. But if it divides us, it's demonic. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? That's kind of the basic understanding that we all have about the forces in our world. So these are the two forces, one moving towards unity and one moving towards division. So another name for them is Danava, meaning the children of Danu. And there are two children of Danu. One is Ramba and the other is Karamba. And this is a beautiful story actually, because it makes the gods look pretty bad and it makes the demons look pretty good, which I like. So here, unsurprisingly, I like this, which is problematic, and I should probably look into that. But anyway, so Karamba, he does austerities, intense austerities. Why? Because he wants power. That's one thing I like about asuras, is that they're willing to do a lot of spiritual practice. The problem is that usually they misuse their powers and get more involved in Maya. But like, don't forget, like they're not fools generally, because they're kind of careful actually in many cases. But they are, in one sense, fools because they do everything for themselves. The ahamtva is very strong with them. Anyway, there's something to that though, because with that motivation, they can do lots of spiritual activities. So when Sri Ramakrishna is talking about redirecting lust, greed, and anger, etc., that's a kind of asuric thing where you take the energies that would otherwise be rejected by a deva and work with them. However, asuras, they tend to work with these energies and also be ultimately undone by the very same energies that bring them power and glory. So ultimately, they're kind of the antagonist, so you can't deny that. But in this story, Karamba, yes, it's true, he's doing austerities because he wants power, because ultimately his ambition is to control the universe, etc. That might be true. But then the first blow comes from Indra. Indra, jealous of his austerities and worried about a future rival, comes and kills Karamba. Now, Ramba loves his brother so much that Ramba feels like life is no longer worth living without Karamba. So Ramba tries to kill himself by jumping into the fire. What a beautiful thing! Asura brothers. You think of Cain and Abel and whatnot, but here you have these two Asura brothers where when one dies, the other just cannot bear to live his life anymore. So he's about to jump into the fire, at which point Agni, the god of fire, who is identified with Durga, those of you who are doing Kali Puja as per our Padati, there's a secret. You'll see that Agni is identified with Durga because you worship Agni right after Durga. And in the second episode, in the second chapter, you see that they come out of the fires of the various gods. There's a link between fire and Durga that's worth exploring. We'll explore it on another night, I think. But coming back to this topic. So, Ramba is about to jump into the fire, at which point the fire, Agni himself, says, wait, what are you doing? Why are you trying to kill yourself? And Ramba says, well, because Indra killed my brother, Karamba, and there's no point to living anymore. And what is it? Agni is so moved by this, and he's like, whoa, that's deep, bro. So here, ask a boon. I'll give you a boon. What do you want? And weirdly enough, Ramba is now interested in living forever because he was just trying to kill himself. But now, after he gets offered a boon, he says, okay, I want to be immortal. Kind of funny. And then it's almost like a knee-jerk response with the demons. If you ask them for a boon, they will immediately say, make me immortal. That's like a trope. But that cannot be asked. Nobody has the power to give that because nobody has that. This is another lesson in spirituality. You cannot give what you don't have. That's why many people try to teach spirituality, but they can't because they don't have spirituality. Spirituality is given, it's not taught, it's not in language. So here, Agni cannot give immortality because he doesn't have it. You can't give what you aren't or what you don't have. Or at least you can for a while. You can fool people that you have it for a while, but not forever. And so Agni knows this is beyond him to give immortality. So he says, look, I can't give you that, but just ask for something else. And this is where demons try to legally get immortality by like kind of finding some, like, wait, this is like, Narasingha. Sorry, what is it? Hiranyakashipu. He gets asked the same thing. What do you want? He asks for immortality. You can't have immortality. So he says, okay, then I can be killed, but I can only be killed, I can be killed, but I can never be killed by a man nor by a beast. I cannot be killed at daytime nor at night. I cannot be killed inside nor outside. And I cannot be killed by any weapons nor by any hands or anything. Like, he carefully explains all the ways a person can be killed. And then he says he cannot be killed in those ways. And then, like, okay, cool, boon granted. At which point God comes as Narasingha, kills him at twilight on the threshold between inside and outside using claws, which are neither hands nor, and Narasingha is neither man nor beast. So, like, God always finds a way to kill you, right? Despite all your vikalpas. So this guy, Ramba, this demon, Ramba, he says, I can only be killed by a woman. That's it. If indeed I must be killed, then I can only be killed by a woman. And this reminds me of that Lord of the Rings like bit where there's the king of the Nazgul and he says haughtily, fool, no man can kill me. And then Eowyn rips the helmet from her head and says with defiance, I am no man, and kills him. But like that's the point. Like no man can kill him. That's maybe the boon that he has. Like the Witch King of Angmar, which is the coolest title anybody could have. The Witch King. Fuck. I want to be the Witch King. Anyway, the Witch King of Angmar, you could argue, is so confident of his prowess because perhaps he has his boon. This boon that no man can kill him. That's his sense of immortality. And that's what many of the demons feel. They feel immortal, puffed up with pride, because many of them have often secured boons like this. So this demon says, I cannot be killed by anyone but a woman. Because, I mean, come on. If you're a demon, big, strong, warrior guy, like, you're like, look, a woman is never going to kill me, you know. And that's why, arguably, the goddess has to come. Because only the goddess can kill him now. Because that's his boon. So that's what happened to Ramba. And the thing is, Mahishasura is Ramba's son. So you have to remember there's a link here between the Danavas, Danu, Ramba, Karamba, and Mahishasura. There's another really great story, another origin story of Durga. She is Katyayani. She's Katyayani because she comes from the sage Katyayana. And Katyayana has a disciple named Kapota. And one day, Mahishasura, to prove his power, disguises himself as a beautiful damsel, seduces Kapota, and then enters into love sports with him under a tree and teaches him all the Kama Sutra and whatnot. And for like aeons, Kapota is like obsessively making love to none other than Mahisha, disguised as this woman. And Kapota, this is important, is the best disciple of Katyayana. So when Katyayana sees that his poor disciple is now bewitched by this Asura, he's enraged. And he's like, oh Kapota, how could this have happened to you? If you wanted, I would have married you after this princess, but instead here you are cavorting with this woman who is in fact none other than Mahishasura, who just wants to prove his powers and has thus beguiled you, etc., etc. So there are stories like this. So arguably, Mahishasura can only be killed by a woman. And so Katyayana prays to the goddess to incarnate as Durga in order to kill Mahishasura. So there are some background stories like this. Then the Devī Māhātmyam gives another background story that I really like. So Vishnu is sleeping on the ocean. By the way, the Devī Māhātmyam opens with this philosophical question. Where does the universe come from? Or better yet, Adhishtana, where does it sit? So here's the universe. Upon what does the universe rest? In other words, what is the cause of the universe or the foundation of the universe? And what's the answer? From the Vedic, Puranic point of view, how did the universe come to be? Too philosophical. That's correct. You're right. That's ultimately going to be the claim. But take a few steps back. Think Puranically, mythologically. Who created the universe? The same person who spoke the Vedas. That's the hint. No. Actually, okay, you're right. That would be true from our tradition's point of view. It'd be Shiva with his forehead speaking the Tantra. But that myth is actually in dialogue with an older myth of Brahma with his forehead speaking the. I've Tantric pilled you, I'm afraid. You're like 2 Kaula Marga pills now. But the foundation myth is Brahma with his forehead speaks the 4 Vedas, and through the power, the phonetic power of the Vedas, the world is created, right? So Brahma creates the world. So the world rests in Brahma. Okay, now think mythologically. What does Brahma rest on? So Brahma is singing the world into existence. The world is Brahma's song. I should explain this too. Isn't it beautiful that the universe is described in terms of Brahma's song? I think that would be a great title for a book or a poem. Brahma's song. The Irish actually have the same idea. The world is a song. It's not a thing. It's a constantly living, dynamic poem or song. What is that Jodorowsky movie? Poesia sans fin or something. I said it kind of French-like, but I don't know how to pronounce it. But the Endless Poem. You should see it. There's a movie. It's a biography of Jodorowsky, the poet Jodorowsky, and it's called The Endless Poem. It's weird. It's surrealistic and supposed to represent events that actually happened in Jodorowsky's life. The Endless Poem. It's a good film. But anyway, the world is an endless poem. And it comes from Brahma. So Brahma is the ultimate poet. But what does he rest on? So this is an important question because it'll help frame the first chapter or the first story of the Chandi. What does Brahma rest on? Exactly. Good. He rests on a lotus. And then the question is, what does the lotus rest on? I hope you're enjoying this game. Yes, exactly. The lotus comes from Vishnu's navel. Okay, so if the world rests on Brahma, the poet, and if Brahma is sitting on the lotus, and if the lotus comes from Vishnu's navel, then what does Vishnu rest on? Vishnu is God. So now the question is, what does God rest on? This is such a big question. But think mythologically, just Puranically. What does Vishnu rest on? Before that, before the ocean. Because you're right, he is sleeping on an ocean of milk. But what is he sleeping on? The serpent, Adisesha. Yeah, Sheshnag, right? Vishnu sleeps on his serpent couch. I like that you said servant couch, Satke. Yeah, true. It's a dasa. Ananta, the serpent, is the das, the servant of Vishnu, but he's Vishnu's couch. So, by the way, when you do a yoga pose, they say you should be like Ananta because the pose should be firm but gentle, just like Vishnu's serpent bed, which is firm enough to hold him but gentle enough to be comfortable. Ananta. And of course, he's named Adi Shesha, which means the primordial remainder. That's really weird. Why is he a remainder? I actually don't know. Somebody has to teach me this. Why is he named Shesha? Because Shesha Nag means remainder serpent. Doesn't it sound like a mattress commercial? Our mattresses are like Vishnu's couch, firm enough that they will hold you, but soft enough that you will get a good night's rest. I know. Look, we're coming up with book ideas, short story ideas, mattress ideas. Don't say the goddess doesn't create infinite abundance. Anyway, so this idea that Vishnu is resting on his serpent couch. Now, what? Yeah, Vishnu is always chilling. That's a good point. Like he's chill Swarupa, as somebody said yesterday. He's just lying down on his couch on an ocean of milk, eternally chilling. But what? Oh, sorry. Now, what is? I gave it away, and Asha actually already said it. But what's the if Vishnu is on a serpent couch, what is the serpent couch resting on? And the answer is obviously the ocean of milk, the Bhavasagara. But now comes the real question of the Devi Bhagavata. I think one of the most stunning philosophical points ever made. And it's this: what does the ocean of milk rest in? Think about that. This is not given in the myth. Now we can get into Asha's more philosophical leaning here, which is like, what does the ocean of milk sit in? If the world sits in Brahman, who sits on a lotus, who sits on Vishnu, who sits on the serpent couch, who sits on an ocean of milk, what does the ocean of milk sit on? Space. Christy, have you heard this before? Because this is just like, really good stuff. Yeah, maybe you can call it dark matter from this modern point of view, but like, what does the ocean of milk sit on? Stephanie says cosmic cereal. That sounds great right now. I could crunch through some cosmic cereal. After a good fast day, you get a bit hungry. I would like some fucking cereal, bro. It's chocolate cereal. I want Kashi Goleen chocolate cereal. You hear that, Ma? I think it's time for some Kashi Goleen. That's my favorite chocolate cereal, just so you know. This lecture is not brought to you by Kashi Goleen. But if you guys are listening, I'm not gonna sponsor your product. But if you do want to send me boxes and boxes and boxes of your chocolate cereal, I will gladly accept because that shit slaps. Anyway, um, yeah, the cosmic cereal is in the milk though, right? So what's the bowl? What holds the milk with the cereal? And Chris G is right on the money here. It's space, right? Space. If there is anything, it must be in space. But what does space sit in? Think about this. Where have you experienced space? Now this point, if you get it, it's what do you call it? Liberation. Instant liberation. Like this, when you get this idea, arguably this is called jnana. Yeah. So this is mother's womb. Yes, this is the idea that this space is mother's womb. This entire universe is in space, which is in mother's womb. But now, here's the question. If everywhere is in space, where have you experienced everywhere? Have you experienced everywhere? And you could say no, because there's much out there that I haven't experienced. But no, actually you have. Because everywhere is in space and you've experienced space. But you've experienced it in consciousness. Right? Like this is the key. This is where it gets very tricky. Where have I not experienced space? Exactly. You are only ever experiencing space, and everything you experience is within space. But where is space? It's within your experience. This sounds really semantic, but just get this flip and you're liberated. This is really the key point. I am not in space. Space is in my experience. I am experiencing space. And guess what? Every fucking thing is in there. Whether I see it or don't see it, whether I know it or don't know it, it's all in space, and space is in the mind. Or arguably, it's an internal event, which is in consciousness. So, this is the flip, right? Liberation is realizing that I am consciousness and everything is in me, not the other way around. I am this body mind within space. No, the space itself is an internal category, which I am experiencing right now. In samadhi, I might not experience it, but right now I'm experiencing space. So we then offer a very sophisticated understanding of space. There are three kinds of space: Mahakasha, Chitakasha, and Chidakasha. Arguably, there's a fourth kind called Nirakasha, but we don't need to get to that. The first three are Mahakasha, physical space. All physical objects exist in physical space, but there is, beyond physicality, a mental plane in which mental objects exist. Thoughts and emotions don't exist in physical space, they exist in mental space. So we have two types of space: physical space, in which physical objects exist, and mental space, in which thoughts, emotions, and various other mental phenomena exist. For example, a ghost could stand where I'm standing, right? That makes sense. Asha could probably verify that. But the ghost doesn't necessarily have to vie with other objects in physical space to take space. It could stand where there's a table because it's not in physical space, although it can be seen in physical space by those who have the eyes to see. Rather, it's in mental space or it's in astral space. But here's the claim that we make: the physical world, which is in physical space, is itself within mental space. So the world space is in mind space, and the mind space is in consciousness space. So Chid Akasha is the key to all of this. That the entire universe comes from Brahma, cool. Brahma sits on the lotus, fine. The lotus is in Vishnu's navel, cool. Vishnu is sleeping on the serpent couch, awesome. And that serpent couch is in the ocean of milk, awesome. And look what we do here. In one fell swoop, you burn the Puranas and you enter into the Upanishads. You go beyond all this mythology and symbol, and you enter into this like ultimate philosophy where you're like, it's space, which is in consciousness. And then who is the goddess? Now the Devi Bhagavatam will drop its key teaching. Devi Bhagavatam calls the goddess Bhuvaneshwari, she who rules over all space, actually. And she is consciousness, Chitti Rupena. And the Chandi will tell you, she is Chitti Rupena Sangsita. She is that who is established as consciousness. So you are the goddess, actually. That's the TLDR of the Chandi is, it's you! It's been you the whole time because everything appears in you as you. You are the mother who created the world. You are the ruler of this universe. And it's your sweet will that everything is happening as it is. You are the one in whom the universe is dissolved. No, no, Satji, you are consciousness. Think of it this way: you are consciousness. You are not living in anyone's consciousness. Everyone is living in this you. By the way, I don't mean Sat though. Sat, K, is like Kalidasa, like Asha, like Nishant, like Bhairavi Nikala, just motes of dust in the suspended in the sunlight of you. I'm not talking about Sat. I'm talking about the one in whom the experience of Sat comes and goes. Wait, I don't know this reference. There's a snake in my boot. I don't know that one. It's probably an American folk story that I don't know. Is it a Briar Rabbit thing? I don't know. Somebody maybe can tell me. Toy. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I think I saw Toy Story, but I suspect that I'm a little older than some of you and younger than others. But when I did see Toy Story, I saw it in the theater. I saw it when it came out, right? But I must have been pretty young. Because, like, I have somewhat of a memory of some creepy moving toys and, like, a cowboy and, like, a spaceman, astronaut, and, like, some sexual tension between the cowboy and the, like, little Bo Peep figure with the hook. Like, I have these memories. Um, and I know that there's like a kid that's bad to the toys, but I don't know what, like, I don't know. It's too deep in the subconscious to understand. So yeah, I'm sorry. There's a snake in my boot. I missed that. Notice I never make Toy Story references because I have no access to any Toy Story memories, and I've never since seen it. Should I rewatch it? Is it worth rewatching? I'm like looking at Asha to see like if there's a nod. It's like not quite a nod, not quite. There's like she's thinking about it. She's like, maybe just the first one. Because it's like it's okay, I guess. Gretchen is like, yes, watch it. Anyway, so yeah, please, you guys, the prerequisites for this class is watch Lord of the Rings and watch all the Star Wars because like those are where all the references will come from, and listen to some fucking rock music because what the fuck, you know, like how are any of these jokes going to land if you don't know who Axl Rose is? Like what? Anyway, my cultural understanding like ends at 1989 or something. Oh yeah, yeah, and a lot of Lana. So that's yeah, that makes it better. So a lot of Lana. Make sure you listen to a lot of Lana. That's just the list. Okay. This idea that she is consciousness, Chitti Rupena, yeah, so this idea of the goddess as consciousness. Good. This is so key, right? That she is conscious. Don't think that you are in consciousness. We could do hours and hours. We have done. We've done 5 years of this. Like of the time that we've spent together, most of our time has been me saying this, holding your shoulders and shaking you, saying Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi. Like forget all this Puranic stuff, like gods and goddesses and forget all this dream. It is but an appearance in you, consciousness. You are Shiva. That's it. We've spent 5 years exploring this one idea that you are not this body that you take yourself to be. It is an experience appearing in you. That you are not even the mind. Even your consistent sense of who you think you are is but an appearance in your experiencing being. And think it's just now that you feel like Satke. When you dream, you might be Elmo in Sesame Street or something. And during your dream, you'll feel like Elmo. How many lives you've lived, how many lives you will live, and all of them are in you. So when you ask me, Satke, in whose consciousness are we in? I'm going to say you. It's you. And I really mean it. I don't mean like, oh, in some metaphorical, poetic way. Literally, directly, right now, you are the very reality that is being spoken of in this book. The Bible is about you. I'm going to go so far as to say the Quran is about you. There is no such thing as God. Can I just like say that? Can I just be honest about that? There is no such thing as God. It is but the self. That's the first point we have to make. And it's the first point that we make in our tradition. Chaitanya Mahatma Jnana Bandha. Chaitanya Mahatma, God, what you mean by God is consciousness and it is the self. Chaitanyam Atma. The self is consciousness. So here, Atma is the predicate, right? Chaitanyam is the adjective that's describing the. Don't ask me to use English grammar words. I don't know. What is the predicate? Is the predicate the adjective? Anyway, so Chaitanyam is describing. It's the describing word, and Atma is a thing being described from the Sanskrit grammar point of view, right? So Chaitanyam Atma, the self is conscious. If I ask you, what are you? And you say, I am a brown-skinned boy with long black hair, pretty good eyebrows because the lady did me good today. No, she did me good earlier this week. Then I'm wrong. I'm absolutely wrong. Because if I say I am this fellow, I'm defining me as body. But that's not what the self is. The body is not the self, arguably. Then you could say, well, am I a person with these memories? No, it would be wrong to say that I am Nishant, the psychological being, for that is not how the self is defined. Rather, the first words in the Shiva Sutra that kind of like argues for the non-dual Shiva position is, the self is consciousness. So the only time you're right in describing yourself is when you say I am. Everything that comes after the I am is but a contraction of the primordial self. I am. That's the basic self. And so Chaitanya Atma, the self is described by consciousness. You are consciousness. Now, the question of what about the body? What about the mind? What about the world? This is where we differ from our more idealistic world negating counterparts. The other non-dualists will say the world is illusory. We say no, the world is real and you are all of it, for it is consciousness only. And so any particularization, any contraction of consciousness is necessarily a creative act of consciousness. So it's not to be rejected, it's to be explored, accepted, etc., etc. But don't forget, the central claim of the tradition is that you are God, or God is you. And by God, we mean consciousness, and the self is nothing but that consciousness. So, the deepest secret, I think, in the Chandi, and arguably in the whole tradition, in the Upanishads, in the Tantras, would be this. When we talk about all of this, we're talking about me, about you, about this, for this alone is real. This suchness, this tatata, you know. And necessarily, this is where all words must end. For this is what devours everything. This devouring act is consciousness reclaiming, retrieving all that was somehow conceived of as being separate from it, projected out of it, and then attaining its own independent objective existence, at least in our mind, outside of it. So, this claim in the Chandi that the goddess, who we're calling Kali, Durga, is none other than consciousness, is one of arguably the deepest claims the Chandi makes, and the most impossible to believe. Because how could I be it? I'm this limited being. How could I be that goddess, which I'm now revering and contemplating? And so, arguably, when Mahishasura is being killed by the buffalo demon, sorry, when the buffalo demon Mahishasura is being killed by the goddess, who in some traditions can be even described as a buffalo herself, there she's killing the goddess. I'm I'm getting all mixed up. Which one is which? When the goddess is killing Mahishasura, the buffalo demon, arguably this is why he's depicted as being in rapture sometimes, not always. Sometimes he's being depicted as like, oh, he doesn't like it. But often when he gets stabbed through the heart, he's looking up at her and he's just like, you know. And by the way, this was Katyayana's curse. He cursed Mahishasura to be killed by the woman he falls in love with. And according to one narrative, Mahishasura is in love with the goddess. And the whole thing is like this erotic tension. He wants to make love to her, actually. Just like Shumba and Nishumba. There's an erotic kind of element there where it's like they want her as their wife. And she says she will only marry the one who is equal in might to her. So only a person who could defeat her in battle will be her worthy spouse. And so that enrages them. And then Dhumra Lochana comes and says, woman, come with me. You deserve a good life. Come and be my master's spouse. And if you don't come, I will drag you by the hair. And then all these like kind of imagery comes up, like kind of erotic imagery. But then here in the Mahishasura myth, that's not so clear. The imagery is more violence and warfare than erotica. But the background story, arguably, is that when Katyayana saw that his best disciple, Kapota, was seduced by Mahishasura in the guise of a nymph, he said, I curse you, Mahishasura. You're so prideful. You just want to show your power and your magic, and so you've deluded my best student. But I'm so upset about this. I curse you to die by the same magic. You will fall in love with the woman who will ultimately kill you. And so Mahishasura is actually crushing on the Divine Mother. But there's a moment at the end when he's killed, when he's stabbed by Mother's spear. It's interesting. There's like homoerotic imagery here. There's all sorts of like various sexual kind of claims that are being made. But anyway, when he's stabbed, he looks up and there's joy, there's rapture, because he's being killed by that which he loves. But now he realizes that what he loves has always been his very own self. And by being killed by the mother, he's purified by death in battle with her, and he attains Advaita. So ultimately, the claim, the central thrust of the text is towards Advaita, towards non-duality, towards the idea that there is only one reality and it is called the mother. Guess what? If you dare claim that you are not God, you know what you're doing? It's blasphemy. You've now claimed that there's something that God is not. How dare you? How dare you limit my mother in this way? You say you are a devotee of God, and then when I say you are God, you say you are not, thereby saying to me that God can be everything but you? What hubris! Do you have the gall to tell me that you are not God? As if you have the gall to limit God's power in that way. So stop being so prideful and be God. Yeah. Okay. So I think I'm satisfied with that. That's just kind of the philosophical parameters, the mythological structures that surround the Chandi. Some of them, not all of them, because it's such a profound tradition and so diverse. So now, let's just go directly into the text, if you don't mind. If anybody has any questions, I'm going to take a bit of a break. Just like, not really. I just want to hear from you a little bit. I'm trying to give you a break, actually. I don't need one. I'm ready. If you want to start chanting, I'm down to start chanting. But I understand I've been barking in your face for like 2.5 hours now. Actually, yeah, we started at 6:30, so 2 hours and 40 minutes I've been just barking in your face. So let me just take a break to give you a moment. And if you have any questions, maybe we can take some now. Comments, concerns, complaints, etc. Om. May this be an offering at the lotus feet of the goddess who is none other than consciousness, who is my very own self. May this be an offering to Shri Sarada Devi, who now in the eternity of time is laughing her laughter of Attahasa and thereby destroying this entire universe and revealing the substratum which has always been my very own essence nature. Om. I pray to myself. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. That was not the most asuric possible closing line. I pray to myself. That is such an asuric thing to say. But the two ends of the spectrum, I hope. We don't know which one we're on. I'm just, all of the two ends of the spectrum resemble one another. I don't want to be so bold as to say I know which end of the spectrum I'm on. Tamas and Sattva often look the same, but don't think that just because we're... Anyway, Jai Ma.